Chapter 121. The beautiful young man provocatively raised his chin, his delicate face showing no intention. This partner of mine can only be ordered around by me. Royal Brother seems to have forgotten. This isn't the capital, but Armament City. However, it doesn't matter. I'm very much looking forward to Royal Brother's arrival. Beligaju didn't speak. All of his emotions were concealed under that exquisite and luxurious silver mask. Although Hellion Vivian very much wanted the young man to remove that arm of his. But after that scene just now, Hellion Vivian had a deeper understanding of Beligaju's danger. It was very clear that the current her, no matter whether it was martial chi or attack power, was inferior to him by a large margin. Someone as smart as him. If she revealed even a little bit of herself, Beligaju might suspect her. At that time, she wouldn't be as lucky as when she was in the capital. A Beligaju without martial chi was already frightening enough. If he recovered now, then he would truly be unfathomable. Therefore, Hellion Vivian felt that it was better for her not to try to break a stone with an egg. Cooperating with the young man's act, at least she wouldn't be caught immediately. Just as she was thinking, Hellion Vivian suddenly felt her shoulder lighten. Puzzled, she slightly raised her eyes and unexpectedly discovered that Beligaju was holding that beautiful young man's arm, his deep eyes looking deeply at her, brimming with ice-cold danger. The always indifferent Hellion Vivian, under that kind of gaze, unexpectedly had some indescribable feelings. Perhaps it was because she was pretending right now, so she had a bit of a guilty conscience. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes, unable to see his face, only his feet. It was obviously the same person from before, but the current him seemed to be emitting a kind of invisible pressure, pressuring her until she couldn't breathe. Suddenly, he directly shook off that young man's arm and reached out to pull her over. Pa! Only the sound of the door opening was heard. It seemed that the entire inn followed along and started to tremble. Beligaju didn't care at all about the young man behind him, taking the drunk Weiwei and walking out of the room. The pretty boy wanted to chase after them, but he was firmly bound in place by a red light. Fire Qilin? The beautiful young man looked at the faintly discernible red-haired man, and his eyes suddenly shook. You're back? Does that mean that his martial chi has completely recovered? The Fire Qilin didn't say anything. Sometimes, it was as cold as its master. In any case, its current mission was to trap young Master Han, so that he would not go and cause trouble for its master. It did not need to care about anything else. However, what it didn't expect was that the beautiful young man laughed evilly. Do you think that by trapping me, your master won't be in danger? It's exactly the opposite. Think about it carefully. Even I can get the news and know that Imperial Brother has come to Armament City, let alone those old fogies from the 4 great clans. If I were you, I'd rush out right now and not stand here wasting time. Imperial Brother should have just recovered his martial chi, right? Are you sure he's fine by himself? The Fire Qilin's eyes darkened as it suddenly thought of something. Just as it was about to fly out, it realized that its master had just given it an order that it must carry out. The so-called order that must be carried out meant that no matter what happened, it had to carry out the order to the end. In other words, it simply couldn't leave this place even half a step. But master, the Fire Qilin clenched its fists and looked outside the inn, but not even half a shadow could be seen. It was raining. The raindrops followed the tiles and dripped onto the bluestone path. Patter-be-patter, Beligaju stood in the rain, his clean clothes not the slightest bit messy. Under the silver mask, layers and layers of cold mist rose up like the night sky. Just like that, he directly pulled Hellion Vivian, walked into a deep alley where there was no one, and suddenly pressed her against the wall. Hellion Vivian was forced to raise her head, her gaze faintly meeting the man's thin lips. Dazzling and bright. The corner of the man's lips before her eyes still had traces of the bright red blood that she had just bitten. His scattered black hair was wet from the raindrops, faintly revealing an icy chill. His gaze was as usual, fierce, domineering, indifferent, arrogant, and even a few emotions that couldn't be seen through. At this moment, Beligaju's aura was no longer gentle, but contained a hint of coldness. He was an intelligent and noble person. The way his eyebrows were knitted, and his lips were pursed in silence, just like the ancient era's imperial family. Although, he did indeed inherit this noble bloodline. But, behind his smile, how cunning and sinister, was he the only one who held supremacy? Hellion Vivian was startled. The silver knife under her long sleeve was just about to strike, but she was shocked by the words he spat out, standing in place. "Do you still want to pretend?" He leaned his body. His thin lips just happened to be right next to her ear. Those low words. Every single word was transmitted into her ears without missing a single word. Hellion Vivian suddenly froze. He already knew it was her, but that didn't make sense. She even disguised her body. How did he recognize her? Was he tricking her again? "This Highness told you to wait for me, to properly settle our debts, but you ran away. Heh, you should know that if this Highness catches you, I definitely won't let you go easily." Beligaju's bewitching cold voice sounded again. Hellion Vivian was sure that the other party recognized her this time. It didn't matter how he recognized her. But he wouldn't let her go easily? Heh, she just didn't cooperate with his act. He was chasing her like this, and just now he was playing with her like that. Thinking of this, no matter how calm Hellion Vivian was, she couldn't help but say, "So that's why you treated me like that just now. Royal, you should have played enough." Played? Beligaju's eyes darkened. Did she think that he was playing? The fingers hidden under the long sleeves slowly tightened, like the tusks of ancient times, carrying a slight hint of anger. How many times was this, again and again, showing mercy to her? But what about her? She actually had her arms around another man's shoulders. His blood-red eyes burned with flames of anger. He forcefully pinched her chin and said in a cold voice, "What if this Highness still hasn't played enough?" "It doesn't matter if you haven't played enough. This game ends here." Hellion Vivian admitted that she couldn't out-scheme him. "If you want to kill me, then do as you please. In your heart, this Highness is such a cruel person?" Beligaju slightly turned his eyes to look at her, the corners of his lips slightly raised. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What else could it be? He spent so much effort to catch her. Wasn't it just to teach her a lesson? Heh. Beligaju suddenly chuckled. In addition to the usual coldness, there was also an extremely oppressive danger. As if he had broken out from the depths of hell, this Highness sometimes really wants to break your arms and legs and tie them to the door. You should know that disobedient prey should be more obedient without its claws. Chapter 122. Beligaju hated Hellion Vivian to the bone, but when he saw her, he felt that it was better to let her be alive and kicking. Before this, Beligaju also didn't feel that Hellion Vivian was anything special to him. She was merely a prey that he caught on a whim. Only, this prey was too disobedient. He had no choice but to catch her himself. As a result, before he even reached Armament City, she already had a partner. She even showed her true face to the other party. Right now, Beligaju only felt that he wanted to smear this little face in front of him and make her obediently stay by his side, no matter what method he had to use. Beligaju's deep pair of phoenix eyes were like ancient pawns. Hellion Vivian heard this and her eyes tightened. He still said that he wasn't cruel. This was even more perverted than killing her or cutting her flesh. However, this lord has already chosen you to be this lord's princess consort. Beligaju looked at her and suddenly changed the topic. His tone was indifferent as he continued to say, "This lord doesn't have a hobby of killing my own princess consort." Princess consort? Hellion Vivian frowned. What was he thinking? Could it be that he really wanted to choose her to be his princess consort? She definitely wouldn't think that this black-bellied and fickle man would only want her. No one could say that they hadn't played enough one second and then say she's his princess consort the next. Unless retired emperor is pressuring you very much? Hellion Vivian thought of the current situation. The emperor was muddle-headed all day long. Even if retired emperor was powerful, he was already old. Now that the 4 great clans were pressuring him, he wasn't young anymore. If he didn't get married soon, perhaps there would really be some kind of homosexual rumor spreading. At that time, the people of the 4 great clans would have even more reason to not let him inherit the throne. After all, a prince who wouldn't even have an heir was equivalent to a cripple. That's why retired emperor was so anxious to let him choose a princess consort. and he himself also wouldn't be unaware of this point. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, her eyes drooped slightly. She looked lazy, as if even the iciness that she had just emitted gave people a hazy illusion. In modern times, she had disguised herself and infiltrated the mafia. She had used this trick to deceive countless big shots. But Bailey Jiaju didn't fall for her trick. His black and white eyes looked at her meaningfully, giving people a kind of invisible pressure. Hellion Vivian truly felt that chatting with the third prince was more tiring than discussing several business deals. However, as long as he understood what the other party wanted, he would be able to do it. Only then could they cooperate. That's right, it was cooperation. From the very beginning, Hellion Vivian didn't want to be enemies with this man. If she had a choice, she wouldn't have angered him. After all, in the Dragon War Empire, relationships were inextricably linked. The third prince was definitely a man who could not be underestimated. She needed to form an alliance with people, and he obviously needed a princess consort. Hellion Vivian raised her head. When she looked at Beligaju again, her eyes were calm. I know that you really need a princess consort right now, and I also have something that I need. Beligaju lowered his eyes. What did she mean by he really needed a princess consort? We can cooperate, Hellion Vivian slowly said. As for retired emperor, I can help you deal with him, and I can also cooperate with you. Cooperate? Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips, hinting her to continue. He wanted to hear what she meant by cooperation. Hellion Wei saw that he was interested and laughed along with him. Her voice also became more confident. I can marry you, but don't worry, I won't restrict you. You can do whatever you want to do. You don't have to care about me at all. Wait until the retired emperor's side is dealt with. You've also dealt with the 4 great clans and smoothly ascended the throne. Just divorce me and let me leave the palace. At that time, if you really like someone, then marry her. I won't stick to you at all and won't have any delusions. Hellion Vivian believed that as long as she said so, the other party would definitely agree. After all, Beligaju was only looking for a shield. She just happened to bump into his reverse scale. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she provoked the third prince to see her as an eyesore. However, since she couldn't escape no matter what, she might as well cooperate with him and act out a play. It was better than being like now, where he was looking for trouble everywhere. As long as they agreed on the conditions, it wouldn't affect her at all. Not only that, their goal was the same as the enemy. She wanted to take back what belonged to her, so she had to go against those old fogies from the 4 great clans. And he must hate them to the bone. When the time came, the 2 of them would work together and do what they needed to do, then go their separate ways. No one would get in the way of the other. How good would that be? Why didn't she think of this point before? The third prince should also be satisfied with this suggestion. Sure enough, as soon as Hellion Wei's voice fell, a rather deep and low voice sounded from the other side. It's just that within that voice was brewing a heavy and icy chill. Listening to it, there was actually a bit of coldness. This is really a good suggestion. These few words were said very casually by Beligaju. The gaze that he looked at Hellion Vivian was also lazy and indifferent. However, his long and slender fingers, which were hidden under his robes, slightly clenched together. You even solved the thing that this highness is most worried about. Not sticking to this highness, heh? Hellion Vivian's thin lips raised. What the third prince should be afraid of is that there is a woman sticking to you. This highness didn't know that you would understand this highness so well. Beligaju said word by word, his fingertips almost sinking into his palms. This damned woman really knew how to provoke him. Should he praise her for being smart, or should he just strangle her to death, so that she wouldn't say another word and make him angry? Hellion Vivian had a comforting expression and patted Bailey Jiajia's shoulder. I also understand the feeling of being forced to marry. Although she was a special agent, in modern times, it was inevitable that her subordinates would hurry to get married. You are so sincere that this highness would feel a pity if he didn't agree. Suddenly, Beligaju laughed and lowered his body little by little. Since we want to cooperate, this highness also has a condition. Hellion Vivian was stunned. She thought that what she said was what he wanted. Could it be that there was something that she didn't think of? Stay away from other people. Beligaju's voice was faint, as if he was just stating a fact. This highness doesn't like to see this highness's princess pulling and pulling other people. It has a bad influence. This was easy. Hellion Vivian also understood. If she really became the third princess, she would definitely be targeted by many people and find fault with her. In ancient times, reputation was very important, so it was normal for him to make such a request. Okay, I will remember. Hellion Vivian smiled gently. I also have a condition. Beligaju coldly pulled down his thin lips. This little fox really didn't eat a loss at all. Speak. Chapter 123. Hellion Vivian's thin lips were half-hooked. If your highness has someone you like, just tell me. I can give up my position at any time. Don't hide it from me. Cooperation was cooperation. She didn't want to be someone else's third party and block arrows for others. Give up my position at any time. Beligaju's eyes were cold to the extreme. The side of his face with the silver mask didn't show the slightest bit of happiness or anger. His slender fingers hanging under his sleeves tightened little by little. The black jade thumb ring that was almost crushed revealed his current mood. You are very magnanimous. Hellion Vivian was stunned and then said with a smile, Your Highness will meet someone you like one day. At that time, Your Highness doesn't need to be embarrassed. Just tell me. Moreover, who didn't want to hold the world with the person they liked? At that time, with the throne in his hand, he shouldn't need her anymore. There were countless beauties in the harem, plus the harem girls that were sent into the palace. There would be one that he liked. She didn't want to rely on the position of princess and compete with those women for the position of empress. That would make her become unbearably fierce. Not to mention that her ambition wasn't here. She wanted to conquer the stars and the sea. How could she be trapped by a small palace? With so many women trying to win the favor of a man who didn't love her, she felt tired just thinking about it. You're really thoughtful. Beligaju looked at her deeply. With a smile that wasn't a smile, there was a bit of ridicule. Even this king doesn't know when I will meet someone I like. You're really thinking far ahead. Her words were for him. But in fact, this little thing with unsteady claws was just leaving a way out for herself. Again and again, she emphasized that she didn't care if he wanted to find someone else. At that time, as long as he followed the agreement and let her go, it was fine. Beligaju clenched his hands. He felt like there was a piece of flint pressing down on his chest. It was so heavy that even when he was angry, it was a bit painful. In the end, Beligaju gave a deep smile and a trace of coldness flashed through his eyes. Did he marry a princess just to let her go one day? Should he say that her calculations were too good? Or should he say that she was deliberately angering him? One more thing. Hellion Vivian saw the smile on his face and thought that he was in a good mood. She hesitated for a while and decided to bring up the last point. Beligaju faintly replied, There's more? Heh. He wanted to hear what else she had to say. We can't be husband and wife. Hellion Vivian didn't feel that the third prince was interested in her, but men were animals that thought with the lower half of their bodies. For the sake of insurance, it was better to make things clear first. Hearing this, the black jade ring on Beligaju's thumb completely shattered. Crack. A crisp sound rang out. His voice echoed in the deserted alley. Coupled with the cold raindrops, it was exceptionally ear-piercing. The candlelight in the distance flickered. The rain was bone-chilling, but Beligaju was not aware of it. He didn't even move. He only gracefully stood in the dark, slightly wrinkling his thick eyebrows. After that, he opened his hand and the powder of the ring drifted with the wind into the rain. Then, a very light, shallow smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Like the spring breeze in March, it lightly brushed past, but after brushing past, it was cold. Do you think that I'm such a picky eater? Without being husband and wife, this woman didn't want him to touch her that much? Or could it be that she was keeping her virginity for someone? Beligaju lowered those black eyes that were as deep as an ancient pool. His pupils seemed to have precipitated many stormy waves. He thought that after so many years, his ruthlessness had already been polished away. Even his happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy seemed to have become more and more lacking. But as it happened, yet, he had encountered such a daring little thing. At first, Hellion Wei Wei thought that she had said something that angered him. Now that she heard what he said, the corners of her mouth twitched. I'm not that bad looking. If she didn't deliberately smear her face, she would still be pretty. Who gave you this kind of wrong impression? Beligaju coldly raised his eyebrows. The light in his eyes that looked at her even carried a little bit of disdain. Hellion Vivian was stunned by his question. This time, she really felt that the third prince wouldn't do anything to her. She then said, "All right, let's not talk about appearances first. I'm still useful to your highness. I can help your highness block marriage and also block peach blossoms." Hellion Vivian knew that like these second-generation imperial princes, they definitely didn't like other people negotiating conditions with them. Even if she suggested that it was beneficial to him, he would still be somewhat disgusted. Therefore, she had to clearly state all the benefits. Beligaju pulled the corners of his mouth into a smile that wasn't a smile. No matter how you looked at it, it felt somewhat mocking. The more you listen, the better it sounds. Then let's find a time to sign a contract. Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju with shining eyes. Beligaju's voice lazily asked, "Do we still need to sign a contract?" "Of course. If I regret it in the future and rely on your highness can announce the contract to the world at any time." Hellion Vivian wanted to leave a secret for herself. This man was so two-faced. If by any chance something happened, she wouldn't be able to react in time. Beligaju deeply looked at her, but didn't say anything. For a moment, Hellion Vivian thought that the other party had seen through her thoughts. She kept feeling like her heart had skipped half a beat. She couldn't be blamed for having this kind of reaction. The third prince was too abnormal. It was as if he could see through people's hearts. All right. Beligaju actually smiled. He slowly raised his thin lips, bringing out an evil charm that no one could see through. Announcing to the world is not a bad idea. And? He agreed so quickly? Hellion Vivian kept feeling that something was wrong. Wasn't this matter going a bit too smoothly? Beligaju narrowed his eyes. What? You want to go back on your word? Don't forget, you were the one who proposed to cooperate. I don't regret it. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She just felt that it was too easy. It was a bit unlike the third prince's style. However, she also didn't understand the third prince's style. Maybe it was because he found her more pleasing to the eye today. It's best if that's the case. Beligaju's voice was very light. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders. She didn't care. Anyway, based on the current situation, if he agreed, it would be good for her. Not only would she not need to return those few hundred taels of silver, she could also openly return to the academy. There was no need to hide. However, why did you give me the flowers at that time? She had always wanted to ask this question. Could it be that she had offended him in the past? But ever since the general's residence, she clearly hadn't seen him even once. Logically speaking, he should have completely forgotten about her. Why did he suddenly give her the flowers at that time? Chapter 124. What do you think is the reason? Beligaju's fingers stiffened. He looked at her coldly and his tone was as casual as ever. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She asked because she didn't know. Your brain is either filled with straw or tofu dregs. Beligaju's sarcastic tone had a hint of sexiness. Of course it's because your skin color is more impressive. Otherwise, what else could it be? Even men are not as dark as you. Hellion Vivian glared. This royal family was too uncute. Didn't she just ask a question? Did he have to attack her personally? After mocking her IQ, he mocked her skin color. Beligaju looked at the small head that hung down. The corner of his mouth couldn't help but raise a touch of demonic coldness. But it's interesting. Interesting? Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Did he think he was choosing a mascot? Since the method is proposed by you, you have to abide by it. Beligaju's voice sounded again. I don't like people who don't abide by the rules. After returning to the capital, you have to do your best in the martial chi competition. The old man is still very shrewd. Hellion Vivian smiled softly. Your Highness, don't worry. Since we are going to cooperate as the third princess consort, I certainly won't embarrass you. Don't belittle yourself, Bailey Jiaju said in a low voice. As the two of them were very close to each other, his breath gently hit the back of her ear, causing her to feel limp and numb. Just be yourself. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And? Helene Vivian slightly raised her eyes. It was just a few simple words, but there was a strange feeling in her heart. Just be yourself. With this sentence, Helene Vivian decided to try to peacefully coexist with Beligaju in the future. Anyway, she had a backup plan. When there was no other choice, she would use it. Do you understand? Bailey Jiaju lowered his eyes to look at her. His thick eyelashes cast a charming shadow. She raised her eyes to look at him, only to see his firm and resolute thin lips, handsome and domineering. Since you all understand, let's set off now. So soon? Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. She hadn't received the money yet. No, I still have things to do. Beligaju stopped in his tracks. What is it? Some personal matters. Helene Vivian wasn't willing to reveal all of her details to Beligaju. It wasn't because she wanted to guard against him, but rather, from the very beginning, she and Heize had already discussed it. The matter of them opening a store couldn't be known to anyone. She came to Armament City mainly to meet with Heize. Even if she wanted to leave, she had to wait until she clearly explained the matter before leaving. Beligaju glanced at her and said faintly, "One day? I'll only give you 1 day. You also want to stay?" Helene Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. It's not too safe, right? Beligaju brushed away the non-existent dust on his body. There's nothing unsafe about it. But looking at the little tyrant's attitude, it seems that he and your highness have some grudges. Helene Vivian said it very tactfully. In fact, she really wanted to say that the way he looked at you was simply as if he couldn't wait to slaughter you. Beligaju grunted. It's a matter of when we were young. I just wanted him to wear a skirt, but he didn't wear it. So I had no choice but to personally put it on him. Helene Vivian. Your Highness, can you not speak of such a perverted matter so lightly? Hey, making a man wear a skirt? No wonder when the little tyrant sees you now, he can't wait to chop you to death. Which man would be willing to wear a skirt, hey? What if the little tyrant goes to call for reinforcements? Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't think that the little tyrant would be able to take this lying down. Beligaju unhurriedly turned his sleeves and said, I won't give him that chance. Helene Vivian felt that the third prince was a little irritable today. She wondered how he would deal with the little tyrant later. In short, she would first mourn for the little tyrant. Umidba. In order to quickly finish her business, Helene Vivian didn't return with Beligaju. However, she wasn't wrong. When Beligaju was facing the beautiful boy, he wasn't that gentle. On the other hand, when the fire Qilin saw that its master had returned, it deeply sighed in relief. The beautiful boy's face was filled with indignation. Imperial brother, if you have the ability, don't let the fire Qilin trap me. Let's fight one-on-one. With you. Beligaju opened his eyes and glanced at him. The beautiful boy immediately straightened his small chest and put on a grandpa. I'm ready to fight at any time. Beligaju coldly continued. Not interested. The beautiful boy's breath was short, and he began to clench his teeth. Then let me go. I'm sleepy. Tonight, you will sleep here. Beligaju supported his chin, as if he didn't see the beautiful boy's eyes that were filled with anger. The beautiful boy sneered. Are you afraid that I will call for reinforcements? Fine. No matter what, you are still my imperial brother. I will reluctantly let you go this time and sleep here. But don't grind your teeth or snore in the middle of the night. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep. Beligaju frowned. He looked at him as if he was looking at a monster. Who told you that I will let you sleep on my bed? The beautiful boy was momentarily confused. What? Sleep on the floor. After lightly throwing down these 3 words, Beligaju immediately turned around and walked towards the direction of the bed. The beautiful boy looked at that cold and lonely figure, and his face wrinkled like a bun. Why did he feel that he was played by his imperial brother? Why? Could it be? The beautiful boy seemed to have figured something out, and his eyes suddenly brightened. Imperial brother should care a lot about my partner, right? Beligaju's hand that was unbuttoning his clothes slightly paused, but from the beautiful boy's angle, he couldn't see anything. The beautiful boy saw that he didn't respond, and prepared to use ruthless medicine. But I heard that my partner doesn't like Imperial Brother. In order to refuse Imperial Brother's concubine selection, She fled to Armament City. Beligaju still didn't pay attention to him. He reached out and casually threw his clothes on the wooden chair and unhurriedly picked up the porcelain cup that was placed on the wooden table. The beautiful boy frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Imperial Brother didn't have any special feelings towards that Hellion Vivian? Was it purely because Hellion Vivian annoyed him? That's why he took her out like just now? The beautiful boy didn't give up. He didn't believe that he couldn't anger him. His bright eyes turned, and the beautiful boy continued to speak. I really didn't expect that there would be a day when Imperial Brother would be rejected by someone. But thinking about it carefully, it's also reasonable. After all, once a woman has a sweetheart, no matter how perfect a man is standing in front of her, she won't be moved. Imperial Brother shouldn't know that between my partner and the Hay family's second young master, there isn't only that little bit of relationship in the academy. Chapter 125. Bailey Jiaju seemed to finally have the time to pay attention to him. Wearing only a pure white inner garment, his tall and slender body stood tall and straight. He slowly turned his head around and faced the beautiful young man and raised his eyebrows. The beautiful youth's eyes lit up. Seeing that he had a reaction, he wanted to continue saying something, only to hear that bewitchingly cold and indifferent voice, with a never-before-seen coldness, ring out from the room, "Qilin." Here, in midair, a figure flashed by. The man's evil smile matched with his long red hair, standing under the moonlight, giving people a mysterious and wonderful handsomeness. Let him be quiet for a while. Beligaju's voice did not have any warmth, so much so that the emotions he expressed could not be heard. However, it made the beautiful youth's expression suddenly change. You can't play like this. You can't beat him in words, so you sent the fire Qilin. Brother Emperor, if you have the ability, don't use your divine beast. Beligaju paused and turned his head to look at him. You mean you want me to do it myself? Of course. What kind of ability is using a divine beast? The beautiful youth proudly raised his face, his delicate chin showing a lazy sharpness. Heh. Beligaju gave a low laugh and casually put the thing in his hand to the side. The fire Qilin began to look at the sky at a 45-degree angle. This young Master Han usually looked quite astute. Why was his brain so stupid at such a crucial moment? If it were to make a move, it would at most knock him out. However, if it was His Highness who made a move, the fire Qilin silently shuddered. Wait a minute. Why did you take off my shoes? The beautiful youth's frightened voice rang out. Brother Emperor, you can't really be interested in men, right? What I like is women. Beligaju lazily glanced at him, pinching a foot-binding cloth with one finger, his long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. I haven't seen you for a few years. Why do you talk so much? Oh. The beautiful youth's eyes suddenly shook, and he did not have the chance to continue speaking, because the man reached out and stuffed the foot-binding cloth into his mouth. The beautiful young man sniffed the incomparably sour smell, and his entire handsome face turned into a tragic vegetable color. The fire Qilin's stomach clenched as it watched from the side. Seeing young Master Han's current situation, it recalled the scene of its master making it eat every day for 3 consecutive months. That feeling, now that the fire Qilin thought about it, it felt like it didn't want to live that kind of life anymore. It shook its head crazily. It thought that if it was young Master Han, it probably wouldn't think of wearing a foot-binding cloth for a few days. That was why it was said that no matter who one offended, one should never offend their master. He was simply going against the devil. Woo. The pretty boy finally regained his senses from the blow just now. His first reaction was to start cursing. Fire Qilin patted his shoulder comfortingly and asked tentatively, Do you want me to knock you out? Oh, he hadn't cursed enough yet. No one can stop me. The fire Qilin shrugged, pinched its nose and said, All right, then I'll be leaving as well. Young Master Han, you can take your time smelling. Oh, wait a minute. I was being reserved just now. Don't you know how to be reserved? Hurry up and take this stinky thing out of my mouth. Blarg. He was simply about to vomit from the smell. The pretty boy looked at the closed door and completely wanted to cry but had no tears. When Beligaju walked into the room, the fire Qilin also followed and immediately prepared a towel. Beligaju silently took the towel and wiped his fingers absent-mindedly, the light in his eyes somewhat dim. The fire Qilin raised its head and glanced at the side of its master's face. It discovered that the man's sparkling, handsome side profile had thin lips tightly pressed into a straight line. The fire Qilin was frightened by Beligaju's expression, and its heart trembled. It had followed its master for so many years, and could already roughly judge his mood from Beligaju's expression and actions. When he sneered, it was most likely when his mood wasn't very good. But just now, its master had clearly taught young Master Han a lesson, so how could he still be in a bad mood? Although the fire Qilin had doubts, it didn't ask. It only rubbed its nose and said, "Master, just now, young Master Han brought a piece of news. The people from the 4 great clans have already arrived. Should we return to the capital first?" Beligaju didn't make a sound, and the room seemed to be even quieter. The fire Qilin lightly swallowed its saliva. It was almost certain now that its master's mood was really very bad. Beligaju's temperament was originally on the cold side, and now there was an additional kind of icy aura on his body that made it difficult for people to approach. It was mixed with a sense of oppression that spread from his eyes, causing the atmosphere in the entire room to become both oppressive and cold. He poured himself a cup of sake and leisurely swirled it. His black hair that was previously wet from the rain was like an incomparably deep night. The more the fire Qilin looked, the more nervous it became, because it had a feeling that its master would crush that cup. Suddenly, Beligaju's thin lips curled, and slowly spat out a sentence. "It seems that this lord's prey still has many things that it hasn't told this lord. Heh, a disobedient prey needs to be properly taught a lesson." Pa. That wine cup really did shatter in his hand, and the wine instantly evaporated, filling the surroundings with a wine fragrance that made people dizzy. "Master!" The fire Qilin cried out in surprise. "Your hand!" Beligaju looked at his cut finger and didn't care at all. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and lightly licked it. A ray of light flashed through his bewitching deep eyes, and a slight breeze blew past, faintly revealing an icy arrogance. The fire Qilin frowned in confusion. Until now, it still didn't understand why its master suddenly became so unhappy. When they had just entered the inn, he was clearly still lukewarm. Could it be because of that woman called Hellion Vivian? It was possible. After all, what its master hated the most was other people touching his things. It wasn't because he liked these things very much, but because he was obsessed with cleanliness. Not to mention prey. Even if it was the clothes he normally wore, he would immediately throw them away if they were a bit dirty. He wouldn't have any attachment to them. If that Hellion Vivian was really like what young Master Han said, and had some kind of relationship with other men, Master should also immediately lose interest in her. The night outside the window was getting darker and darker. In the inn next to the armament competition venue, Hellion Vivian sat opposite He Zhe and put the white cat on the table. "There's a change in the plan. I need to go back first." He Zhe's domineering and handsome eyebrows rose. "You're not afraid that the royal family will catch you?" Hellion Vivian's hand that was drinking tea paused, and she only vaguely made an "in" sound. She didn't tell He Zhe about her agreement with the third prince. He Zhe suddenly leaned over, his eyes bewitching. "As long as you have an engagement, the royal family won't make things difficult for you anymore. How about it? Do you want to consider being this young master's wife?" And Chapter 126. I'm not interested in a playboy. Hellion Vivian lightly rotated the teacup in her hand, each word clear. "What's more, if you marry me, wouldn't that childhood sweetheart of yours cry until she fainted in the toilet?" The smile on He Zhe's face instantly became serious. He reached out and drank a mouthful of wine. "Ah, her? She's eager for me to get married quickly. The day before yesterday, she even sent a pile of scrolls to my grandfather. She really loves to worry." When He Zhe said this sentence, he carried a faint ridicule, as if he didn't put anyone in his eyes. Hellion Vivian actually disagreed. Everyone said that He family's second young master's eyes were high, and that his interest in women would never exceed half a month. But in Hellion Vivian's eyes, that was because he hid someone in his heart. "You can leave first." He Zhe turned his head, his face clearly defined, his mood flat. You won against young Master Wu Shuang's armament. There's bound to be people who aren't convinced. Staying in Armament City isn't safe. Hellion Vivian thought that this was indeed the case, so she didn't stay any longer. After clearly explaining everything that needed to be explained, she wanted to leave the inn. But she didn't expect to run into Hellion Jiaoer and her group of people. They seemed to have just returned from the armament convention, each of them holding a newly selected armament in their hands. After seeing Hellion Vivian, those people's expressions were all different. Chang Feng, look, that ugly woman also came. She shouldn't have come looking for you, right? Someone laughed out loud. You couldn't blame these people for having this kind of reaction, because the previous Hellion Vivian was indeed very infatuated with Morong Chang Feng. Every day, she stayed in the Defense Division residence, thinking that she could find out even a little bit of news about her future husband. This was the idea that every young girl waiting to be married would have, but these people took it as a reason to ridicule Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian coldly laughed. With the white cat lying on her shoulder and an umbrella in her hand, she didn't pay attention to that group of people. When Morong Chang Feng heard someone mention her, the light in his eyes couldn't help but look towards her side. Under his long sleeves, his hands also tightly clenched. Perhaps even he himself didn't know why, but these days, Hellion Vivian's face kept flashing in his mind from time to time. He thought it was probably because he was not used to it. After all, no one could get used to a person who was so passionate about them in the past being so cold and indifferent now. Look at the umbrella in her hand. Don't tell me it's the one made by young Master Wu Shuang. Jealous gazes fell on Hellion Vivian. Among them, there was no lack of young ladies from aristocratic families who adored Morong Chang Feng. They also had a good relationship with Hellion Jiaoer, so when they saw Hellion Vivian, they were naturally not pleasing to the eye. On top of that, her father also had a certain status in Armament City, so towards Hellion Vivian, she wasn't that polite. Hey, we're talking about you. Bring that umbrella of yours over here, and let us take a look. However, Hellion Vivian acted as if she didn't hear anything, minding her own business as she walked forward. That young lady from an aristocratic family had never been treated like this before. She walked over in large strides and directly blocked Hellion Vivian's path. Her voice was cold. This young lady is talking to you. Did you not hear? Hellion Vivian indifferently glanced at her and only said 2 words. Get out of the way. Huh. That young lady found it funny as she tilted her head. Who do you think you are? You dare to talk to this young lady like this? Just because you were lucky enough to win young Master Wu Shuang's armament, you really think you understand armaments very well? Ugly girl, let me tell you, you're still far from it. Hellion Vivian's eyes looked up and met that young lady's eyes. Her thin lips curved, bringing out a severe iciness. I'll say it again. Get out of the way. That young lady wasn't easy to deal with. Seeing that Hellion Vivian didn't give in to her, her face immediately darkened. Eldest sister, Hellion Jiaoer stood by that young lady's side and used a look that said, how could you be so insensible to look at Hellion Vivian? This is the daughter of the Armament Assembly's vice president, Miss Cheng. Shouldn't you be a bit more respectful to her? Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and a mocking smile slowly overflowed from her eyes. That young lady looked at her appearance and was in a bad mood. She sneered. Forget it. This young lady also won't lower herself to her level. Towards this kind of country bumpkin who hasn't seen many armaments and doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth after occasionally winning one, how much respect do you expect her to have? Little sister Jiaoer, wait until you buy that armament from Profound Heavens. You really should let this country bumpkin see it, and let her properly know what is called disparity. After hearing Profound Heavens, the smile at the corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth became even wider. When she raised her eyebrows, it also carried a bit of a unique and unknown flavor. Hellion Jiaoer faintly smiled and hypocritically evaded. It's just that we're still discussing. Whether or not we can get it is still not certain. However, it seems that there should be a plan. Little sister Jiaoer, what are you afraid of? The Defense Division has plenty of money. Moreover, only a good armament can match your innate talent. Chang Cheng patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand and disdainfully swept a glance at Hellion Vivian. Unlike some people who curry favor with others everywhere, but don't have the slightest bit of real talent, I reckon that she hasn't even heard of what Profound Heavens is. If I were Grandmaster Zizun, accepting a disciple like this wouldn't be enough to lose face for me. Chung Cheng's words caused a burst of laughter from all around. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest, her body leaning against the pillar behind her. How should she tell this Miss Chung that the profound heavens that she spoke of was actually opened by her? Well, let's not waste any more time here. Murong Chang Feng faintly cast a glance at Hellion Vivian. His handsome face didn't have the slightest trace of change. You should also return to where you belong. When Chang Chung heard Murong Chang Feng help Hellion Vivian out of the predicament, there was a burst of discomfort in her heart. Didn't Murong Chang Feng hate this woman the most? What Murong Chang Feng said is right. We completely don't need to waste time on a good-for-nothing. Chung Chung deliberately misinterpreted Murong Chang Feng's words, smiling appropriately. I heard that she will also participate in the martial chi competition not long after. At that time, we can actually have a good exchange. She must beat this ugly woman until she can't even crawl up. Hellion Vivian didn't respond to her words. People who were familiar with her should know that she was in a hurry. Otherwise, she wouldn't have endured for so long and would have already sent a fist flying over. However, considering that the third prince was still waiting for her, plus if this matter attracted the attention of the four great clans, it would inevitably cause trouble for the third prince. What she disliked the most was to cause trouble for her own business partners. However, having a good exchange in the martial chi competition actually happened to coincide with her thoughts. Woman, your smile is very evil. Chapter 127. Yuan Ming's lazy voice came out from the fantasy space. Hellion Vivian used her mind to communicate with Yuan Ming. Is that so? Of course, it's not like you to hold back like this. Yuan Ming laughed evilly. You shouldn't be planning something, right? Hellion Vivian didn't speak, but the smile on the corner of her mouth revealed her craftiness. However, the young lady named Chung Chung didn't know Hellion Vivian's thoughts and thought that she was afraid of her, so she proudly raised her thin lips. Hellion Jiaoer also felt that she had vented her anger, and her red lips curved up. Sister Chung, let's go up first. The people from Profound Heaven will be here soon. It's not good to stand here. Sister Jiaoer is so thoughtful. Chung Chung casually retracted his gaze from Hellion Wei Wei's body, as if he was looking down on her. My father will also be here in a while. My father is the kind of person who can't stand people who rely on flattery to climb up the ranks. These days, he has been in contact with people from Profound Heaven. Who knows, maybe he can help Sister Jiaoer. Hellion Jiaoer smiled. Then this younger sister will first thank elder sister. There's no need to thank me between us. Chung Chung intimately used the hand that was holding the handkerchief to pinch Hellion Jiaoer's face. The two people smiled at each other. They were both extremely good-looking beauties. This kind of curved lips and light smile actually had the meaning of captivating the birds and beasts. The people who stayed in the hotel all looked over, and even the eyes of those young masters emitted a faint luster, thinking that if they could marry such a woman, their lives would be complete. In this way, the slightly tanned Hellion Vivian seemed to be somewhat unpresentable. At least in their hearts, she was unpresentable. What they didn't expect was that just after they went to the private room, the person in charge of Profound Heaven happened to come over. The person in charge was a middle-aged man of average age. He was also Hei's most trusted assistant, Uncle Zhang. When he saw Hellion Vivian standing at the door, his originally lukewarm footsteps suddenly quickened. He walked towards Hellion Vivian, his voice full of surprise. Big boss, why are you here? I'm here to discuss something. Hellion Vivian's voice was indifferent as she looked at the master behind him. Seeing this, Uncle Zhang paused and said, Big boss, this is Master Chung, who is cooperating with us this time. During this period of time, Chung Xiong had been focusing all his attention on the collaboration with Profound Heavens and didn't look at today's armament test. So he didn't think that it was Hellion Vivian from the capital. However, what made him surprised was that Profound Heaven's boss was actually a young lady. One must know that in the armament world, this Profound Heavens, from the moment it was established, made many armaments that made people endlessly astonished. Almost every piece of armament was crazily fought over by everyone. Many people said that their family's armaments were almost comparable to the armaments personally made by young Master Wu Shuang. Even some highly respected masters couldn't say whether the armaments made by Profound Heavens were better, or the armaments made by young Master Wu Shuang were better. Even this time, young Master Wu Shuang had agreed to participate in the armament conference because he wanted to see who the boss behind Profound Heavens was. But what made people regretful was that she didn't appear. Even her basic information, whether she was a man or a woman, and how old she was, no one knew. However, everyone had always thought that she was a disciple of some famous master. At the very least, she was born in an aristocratic family, like young Master Wu Shuang's successor. But Chang Xiong looked at this person in front of him. He hadn't even seen her in the armament world. Let's not talk about other things first. Could it be that she hadn't even taken the armament master exam? Otherwise, it was impossible that he wouldn't have any impression of this kind of genius, considering that he was the armament judge every year. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of inquiring more about Profound Heaven's boss from Uncle Zhang, but Uncle Zhang's mouth was too tight. It could be seen that Uncle Zhang was born in an aristocratic family's housekeeper. He had a steadiness that ordinary housekeepers didn't have. In addition, there were too many people who wanted to cooperate with Profound Heavens. Uncle Zhang had always been polite to him, but not very enthusiastic. If it wasn't for this young girl's appearance, he wouldn't even see any fluctuation of emotion on Uncle Zhang's face. Boss's surname is Chung? Hellion Vivian faintly smiled and raised her good-looking eyebrows. She meaningfully curved her thin lips. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time. Chang Xiong stuck out his chest. He knew it. It was that Uncle Zhang who didn't understand the rules. At the very least, he was also the vice president that everyone in the armament world knew. Yet, he still loved to ignore him. Look at their boss. Her age was a bit young, but she was still quite enthusiastic. However, Uncle Zhang didn't think so. He glanced at Hellion Vivian. Although he hadn't known Big Boss for a long time, he still had a certain understanding of her. He couldn't look at her with the eyes of an ordinary girl. When she truly wanted to discuss business with someone, she absolutely wouldn't smile like this. Her decisiveness in killing and business talk made him, a person who had been in the business world for a long time, endlessly admire her. And her tricks, what were they called? Oh, right. Marketing concept. Hungry consumption. Up until now, Uncle Zhang still didn't understand where this phrase came from. However, looking at Big Boss who started from scratch and caused a sensation in the armament world as soon as she appeared, from ordinary martial artists to martial arts aristocratic families, there wasn't a single person who didn't ask about their armament. He knew that this girl wasn't simple. Therefore, this Chang Xiong seemed to have underestimated his Big Boss a bit. I didn't expect you juniors to have heard of this old man's taboo name. As Chang Xiong spoke, he stroked his own beard. His eyebrows carried a kind of complacency that came from being in a high position for a long time. Hellion Vivian smiled and already pointed out, Vice President Chung did a good job of advertising. Advertising? Chang Xiong puzzledly wrinkled his eyebrows. Why did he feel that he somewhat didn't understand the other's words? Hellion Vivian didn't continue to circle around this issue. Instead, she glanced at Uncle Zhang. Uncle Zhang, I have a few matters that I want to discuss with you alone. Yes. Uncle Zhang strolled over. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice. The more she spoke, the wider the smile at the corners of her mouth became. It was as if a demon had found some fun toy when it was bored. Uncle Zhang's gaze on Chang Xiong paused. He respectfully replied, Don't worry, Big Boss. I know what I should do. Then I'll leave first. Hellion Vivian lightly smiled and nodded in Chang Xiong's direction. Stroking the white cat, she slowly stepped into the long alley. Yuan Ming's deep and shallow laughter was transmitted over. Woman, you're simply too bad. Acting like this, wouldn't that Miss Chung and that little sister of yours be stifled to death? Ha! Chapter 128. What I want is to make their hearts feel stifled. Hellion Wei slowly raised her eyes, her thin lips curled into a smile, as handsome and demonic as the devil's. Phoenix Building Inn, second floor private room. Chang Xiong brought Uncle Zhang upstairs. After seeing that group of people, he faced Morong Chang Feng and laughed heartily. Nephew, you also came. How is it? Is Master Tu Lao doing well recently? Is he still looking for that genius disciple he wants to accept? Master's body has always been strong. Murong Changfeng's voice was very dull. As for other things, I'm not too clear. Chang Chang stood at the side with a red face, interrupting father. It's not like you don't know how busy Murong Changfeng is, yet you still ask him about these things. Chang Xiong glanced at his own daughter. Regarding her thoughts, he more or less understood. However, even if their Chang family had a place in the world of armaments, wanting to marry into Prince Murong's Murong manor was also a social climb within social climb. Therefore, he was very happy that his daughter could interact more with Murong Changfeng, so he also didn't teach more. Instead, he continued with the previous topic and directed it towards Uncle Zhang. This is Uncle Zhang, the manager of Profound Heavens. Their boss is the one who can truly be called amazing. At such a young age, he's already made no less than 10 armaments. If Master Tu Lao saw him, he would definitely change his mind and no longer look for that whatever genius. Uncle Zhang stood at the side, neither servile nor overbearing, and also had the rules of a manager, not too outstanding, but also not too calm. Hearing Uncle Zhang's words, he only smiled calmly. Uncle Chang has seen Profound Heaven's boss? Helian Jiaoer's eyes lit up. It said that this boss' whereabouts were mysterious, extremely difficult to approach, even his surname and name. No one knew. If she could get through to Profound Heaven, then in the future, she could easily get whatever armament she wanted. Even if that slut obtained an armament made by young Master Wu Shuang. So what? She still couldn't compare to her. The more Helian Jiaoer thought, the deeper the smile on her face. She believed that when the time came, with the Defense Division's influence, Profound Heaven's boss wouldn't not give her face. Now, she only needed Uncle Chang to recommend her. The Helian Jiaoer raised her head and looked at Chang Xiong. Chang Xiong stroked his beard and laughed. I've seen her. For a girl to have such an achievement, her future will be limitless. A girl? Murong Changfeng's handsome face finally had some ripples. The hand holding the teacup slightly paused. Profound Heaven's boss is a girl? Not only Murong Changfeng, but even the rest of the aristocratic family's young masters also showed a very surprised expression. They were not unaware of the influence of Profound Heavens. In their minds, the boss of Profound Heavens must be a very powerful old man, or at the very least, a master. However, they did not expect that the boss of Profound Heavens would be a girl. Father, could it be that someone is impersonating him? Cheng Cheng's tone was somewhat sour. Originally, she worshipped the boss of Profound Heavens, just like how she worshipped Master Wu Shuang. However, when she heard that the boss was a girl like herself, there was a very subtle feeling in her heart. Coupled with the fact that Murong Changfeng's attention was completely attracted, Chang Cheng was even more uncomfortable, so she had such a prejudiced guess. Uncle Zhang listened and raised an eyebrow. Impersonation? According to what Miss Cheng said, I am also an impersonator? I didn't mean that. Cheng Cheng looked at Uncle Zhang indifferently. She had always looked down on the servants. He was just a housekeeper. No matter how powerful he was still a servant. Why was he so arrogant? Chang Xiong naturally knew his daughter's personality. He was afraid that she would offend Uncle Zhang, so he quickly reprimanded Cheng Cheng. Don't be unruly. Cheng Cheng stretched her neck and wanted to say something. However, she was slowly interrupted by Uncle Zhang. Our Profound Heavens has always been under the control of my boss. Since Miss Cheng is so suspicious of my boss, then there is no need to discuss the matter of cooperation. Vice President Cheng, I will take my leave first. Cheng Xiong didn't expect that the business that he had been talking about for 3 days would be ruined because of 1 or 2 words. Uncle Zhang, Cheng-er is still young. How could she have offended Uncle Zhang? Uncle Zhang, please speak frankly. You can't just not talk about cooperation because of these trivial matters. Uncle Zhang stopped in his tracks and pretended to be humble as he said with a smile, What are you saying, Vice President Cheng? Miss Cheng is the daughter of the Cheng family and I'm just a servant. There's no such thing as offending her. It's just that my boss is a little strange. She loves money, but she will never cooperate with anyone who has offended her. Offend? Cheng Xiong didn't understand and was slightly stunned. When did this old man offend her? He only offended that little girl today. Uncle Zhang didn't speak again. Instead, he looked at Cheng Cheng with a deep meaning and continued to leave. Cheng Cheng was unhappy and rudely stopped him. I want to see if you dare to leave. Uncle Zhang looked up and smiled. Miss Cheng, what are you trying to do? Are you threatening me? She's just the boss of a martial arts firm, yet she's so cocky. Your boss doesn't want to cooperate, right? Then this young lady will properly remove the claws of the dog she's raising and properly beat her. As Cheng Cheng spoke, she wanted to call someone. Uncle Zhang calmly glanced at Cheng Shtong. Vice President Cheng, before our boss left, she wanted me to give you a sentence. Cooperation between martial arts firms is voluntary. This is the rule that President Jing of the Armament Guild personally set. No one is allowed to use force to oppress the weak. Especially as a member of the Armament Guild, you can't abuse your authority even more. Otherwise, you will be forever expelled from the world of martial arts. Vice President Cheng, as the Vice President of the Armament Guild, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with this rule, right? After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang couldn't help but admire the words that his boss had instructed him to say before she left. It was simply like hitting the nail on the head, pressuring Cheng Xiong so that not only did he not dare to make things difficult for him, he also had to respectfully send him back. As expected, Cheng Xiong immediately pulled Cheng Cheng back. His face was filled with anger. Nonsense, Daddy. When had Cheng Cheng ever suffered this kind of suffocation, especially in front of the air? This made her lose even the slightest bit of face. She just wanted to say something again to salvage a bit. Yet Cheng Xiong heavily grasped her wrist. Shut up, your father has truly spoiled you. As he spoke, he glanced at the servant girl standing to the side. What are you in a daze for? Still not quickly bring the young lady away. That servant girl answered yes in panic and hurriedly went to pull Cheng Cheng. Mississippi, you let go of me. Cheng Cheng's unconvinced voice became more and more distant. This young lady actually wants to ask that one surnamed Zhang. How much ability does that boss of his have to not even pay my father's account? Chapter 129. When Cheng Xiong heard this, the fire in his heart burned even more fiercely. Ordinarily, he indeed taught his daughter like this. As the vice president of the Armament Association, having a little privilege was natural and proper. However, that was in private. He didn't want her to shout it out in front of so many people. Cheng Xiong seemed to be really angry. He pointed to the imperial bodyguard at the side and said, Go tell Miss to go out less in the future. If she says one more word, go to the ancestral hall at the back of the mountain. Not knowing if it was because the imperial bodyguard's words had passed on, Cheng Cheng's side finally quieted down. Cheng Xiong let out a long sigh. He turned his head and said to Uncle Zhang, This daughter of mine is really too outspoken. Uncle Zhang, you must not take it to heart. Vice President Cheng, I just said that this old servant is only a manager. Uncle Zhang smiled and said, It's just that our boss still has some words to say to Vice President Cheng. It's better to be low-key. The smile at the corner of Cheng Xiong's mouth stiffened. He firmly clenched both his hands. This was the first time he was in danger from a little girl whose hair hadn't even fully grown yet. What was even more hateful was that the little girl simply wasn't here. Just by passing on a message, he couldn't even move an inch. Speaking of which, why would that little girl have such a big opinion of his own beloved daughter? Could it be that Cheng had really offended her? Cheng Xiong didn't understand. However, in just a short half an hour, all of his efforts in these past few days had turned into bubbles. Originally, the Cheng family hadn't produced any outstanding armament masters these past few years. On the surface, the Cheng family still looked the same as before. In the armament world, they had a pivotal position. In reality, only he himself knew that the current Cheng family already couldn't be compared to the previous Cheng family. And Profound Heaven's momentum was just right. He looked for Profound Heavens precisely because he wanted to borrow the other party's momentum to shake up the Cheng family. If Profound Heavens didn't cooperate with him, the Cheng family's road would be very difficult to walk. But to have him lower his head to a little girl, he absolutely wouldn't do it. Uncle Zhang also saw through Cheng Xiong's thoughts. Early on, the boss didn't agree to cooperate with the Cheng family. It was also because he was talkative. He felt that the Cheng family was an old name and had absolute influence in the armament world. That's why he repeatedly proposed to the boss to let her reconsider. Now it seems that not only is Cheng Xiong unable to teach his own daughter well, even he himself has that kind of superiority feeling that no one is inferior to him. Such a person would not make much of a difference in the business world. Uncle Zhang took the hat and put it on his head. He didn't say another word to Cheng Xiong. Just as he walked out of the inn, someone chased after him. Uncle Zhang, wait. It was the Hellion Jiaoer. She was much smarter than Cheng Cheng. At the very least, she didn't show it on her face even though she looked down on these servants. Her shy smile had a hint of gentleness. Uncle Zhang was a very smart person and had been a retainer of the He family for 2 generations. Although these young ladies in the capital did not know him, he was very familiar with each and every one of them. This was also because the old master had recently made up his mind to marry the second young master. Oh no, he wanted the second young master to marry a wife. He could only say that this Hellion Jiaoer was very good at managing herself. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw him stop, she signaled the maidservant beside her to pass the things in her hands to him. Uncle Zhang didn't need to look at those things to know what they were. He raised his lips and smiled, but didn't accept them. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw that he didn't accept the banknotes, she wrinkled her eyebrows. Miss, what should we do? That maidservant had never seen someone who didn't accept money. The Hellion Jiaoer secretly scolded that he didn't know how to appreciate kindness. The corner of her mouth hooked up. Uncle Zhang thinks it's too little? Miss Jiaoer misunderstood this old servant's meaning. Uncle Zhang raised his head. The light in his eyes was not weak. Perhaps Miss Hellion Jiaoer doesn't understand our profound heavens. Almost everyone in the armaments world knows that we, profound heavens, don't accept these. The Hellion Jiaoer squeezed the handkerchief in her hand tightly and said, I also don't have any other meaning. I just want to buy an armament personally made by your boss. Money can be discussed. Uncle Zhang laughed. To be able to make our boss personally make an armament, money is one thing, but also cultivation. You don't have to worry about this. Before the Hellion Jiaoer could speak, the maidservant standing next to her opened her mouth, arrogantly carrying a thick sense of pride. My miss is the successor of the Hellion family, a top student at White Academy, a genius that everyone envies. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the armaments aristocratic families in the capital may not be able to win against my miss. Uncle Zhang glanced at that maidservant and suddenly laughed. I forgot to mention the third point, which is also the point that Profound Heavens just added. What? No matter what you say, my miss can afford it. The maidservant looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face and saw that her eyes were full of praise. The words that came out of her mouth were even more arrogant. Uncle Zhang's voice was steady as he opened his mouth, pausing after each word, arrogant and egotistical. We, Profound Heavens, will not sell anything to her. Hearing this, the maidservant's proud mouth suddenly stiffened, and she couldn't help but look towards the Hellion Jiaoer. Sure enough, the Hellion Jiaoer's face was even uglier than her. That small face that was originally pretending to be friendly, at that moment, became incomparably ferocious. It was as if she was trying to hold back the billowing waves of anger. What the hell? The Hellion Jiaoer didn't flare up at the moment. After Uncle Zhang left, she fiercely threw out the handkerchief in her hand. Miss, don't be angry, that maidservant hurriedly said. Master has already contacted the person in charge of Profound Heavens. This steward definitely doesn't know who you are, so he dares to be so rude to you. Wait until we reach the capital. Master will take the armaments back for you. At that time, we will let this old thing and that whatever boss take a good look at who they have provoked. The Hellion Jiaoer listened to the maidservant's words and took a deep breath, as if relieved a lot. A group of ignorant country bumpkins? Mrs. Right. At the same time, the maidservant nodded fiercely and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she saved in time. Otherwise, when the Mrs. Temper flared up, she wouldn't need to keep her arm. The Hellion Jiaoer tidied up her sleeves. Let's go back and wait until we reach the capital. The people of Profound Heavens had eyes, but failed to see. Sooner or later, they would regret it. How could they know that the other party wasn't blind? but simply didn't want to sell the armaments to her at all. After a little servant saw Uncle Zhang, he asked, "Uncle Zhang, isn't that the second miss of the general's residence?" Uncle Zhang glanced at the little servant. "Don't ask what you shouldn't ask." The little servant touched the bridge of his nose. "I didn't want to ask. I just wanted to ask what she said to you. She looks really beautiful up close." "That's still asking." Uncle Zhang's voice was neither slow nor slow. "Well, it's about time to go back. Big Boss is also here." She saw Cheng Xiong and was not satisfied with the Cheng family. The little servant's eyes shook. "Big Boss? She's here. Where?" Chapter 130. She left a long time ago. Uncle Zhang calculated the abacus in his hand. "This time, the cost of this trip is not small. Give me all the accounts." The servant's expression was tranquil. "I've never seen the Big Boss's appearance. When you first entered Profound Heaven, I already said, don't be curious." Uncle Zhang closed the abacus, as if he had thought of something, turned his head and said, "Oh, that's right. Pass down the order. Just say that the Big Boss said that in the future, if people from the Defense Division come to buy armaments from us, clearly tell them that they have to pay 10 times the price before we sell them." 10 times. The servant slightly lowered the corners of his eyes. How did the people from the Defense Division provoke the Big Boss? Not only did they want to earn the other party's money, but they also clearly told the other party. This was simply killing the other party without giving the other party a quick death. After the people from the Defense Division heard this news, they would certainly be angered to death. Uncle Zhang smiled and shook his head. "That's why I said, no matter who you offend, don't offend our family's boss." Even if she was in class, she could still make armaments under the teacher's eyes, not to mention dealing with these young masters and young ladies who smell like milk. A person who only used a month's time to make a name for herself in the world of armaments. Merely relying on how many armaments she made was useless. It also depended on her brain. In the end, it was these people who looked down on his boss. What's more, his boss also had that kind of identity, the capital's outstanding, hedonistic young lady. Everyone wanted to come and step on her foot, so much so that even the people from the Hellion family had removed her name from the family. This kind of person, who could have imagined that she would be Profound Heaven's boss, the armaments world's most popular armaments master. After he finished speaking, Uncle Zhang entered the carriage. He didn't know that just after he left, the remaining servant's eyes flashed with a trace of light. Accompanied by bursts of light coughing, that servant slowly walked into the deserted long alley. His slender pale fingers streaked across the side of his face. An inconspicuous thin layer of skin lightly separated from that originally somewhat healthy complexion of his face. In the end, only a sickly handsome paleness was left. "Young master." The black-clothed man floated down and kneeled on the ground with one knee, his eyes slightly raised with a loyal and devoted expression. "In the future, this kind of thing should be left to this subordinate to do, your body." "It's fine." That person lightly coughed twice. His long sleeves fluttered with a faint medicinal fragrance. His voice was as gentle as jade, completely different from before. The moonlight shone on his chiseled face. Who else could it be other than the young master of an aristocratic family, Jing Wushuang? No one knew that the reason he came to Armament City this time, other than to find an owner for that female-specific armament, the more important reason was that he wanted to meet the boss of Profound Heavens, who was rumored to be very popular. In the end, that person's whereabouts were even more secretive than his own. He had no choice but to disguise himself as a servant of Profound Heavens to approach him. However, after waiting for 2 whole days in Armament City, he still didn't see that so-called boss. However, at least there was still something to be gained. Although Uncle Zhang acted cautiously, it was inevitable that he would reveal information about that person during the conversation. For example, even if she is in class, she can still do armaments under the teacher's nose. This meant that the person was not an old master like everyone thought. Instead, he was just a student. And in the Dragon War Empire, there was only one academy located in the capital. That was the White Academy that everyone yearned for. Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes, covering the bits of broken light emitted from inside. He instructed the person on the ground, Go tell the people at White Academy that I accepted their invitation. Ah, the black-clothed man rarely showed this kind of surprised expression. Young master, you really want to go to that academy to teach as a teacher? Not to teach. Jing Wushuang lightly coughed twice. The smile on the corner of his mouth was still as gentle as jade. I'm going to be a student. The black-clothed man stared. What? Young master was going to be a student? What kind of joke was this? Even if it was a supreme master's armament, it was not necessarily comparable to young master. If he was going to be a student, who would dare to be his teacher? The black-clothed man had a premonition that in the future, White Academy would no longer have such a peaceful day. Going in like this won't do. I need to disguise myself. Jing Wushuang was very considerate. His fingers supported his forehead and lightly smiled. I don't want to be surrounded by people every day, asking me to help them make armaments. The black-clothed man lowered his eyes. Apart from the Supreme Master, those teachers of White Academy have never seen young master before. You shouldn't be recognized when you go in. There are a few students from White Academy who are participating in the armament meeting this time. Jing Wushuang coughed. His pair of extremely gentle and elegant eyes were like an ink painting. The person who won his armament was one of them. The black-clothed man's eyebrows slightly drooped. Young master, don't worry. I'll greet the 3 students who are present today. Apart from that Hellion Vivian, whom master is not familiar with, the other 2 people won't reveal young master's identity. She also won't. Jing Wushuang's tone was indifferent as he withdrew his gaze. The black-clothed man was astonished. How did young master know? She's not that kind of person who likes trouble. Jing Wushuang coughed twice as if he had thought of something. The rare corners of his mouth unexpectedly revealed a faint arc. It was the kind of genuine smile that was different from the one in front of people. The black-clothed man looked somewhat dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Shouldn't he ask Uncle Liang what had happened these 2 days when he wasn't here? Young master actually spoke up for that famous hedonistic young lady in the capital? This was a bit too strange. Let's go. Jing Wushuang turned around. His sickly handsome appearance made him look like a gentle jade young master in an ancient painting scroll. He was neither anxious nor impatient, tidy up and prepared to enter the academy in a few days. The black-clothed man lowered his head and appeared very respectful. Yes, however, what else is there? Jing Wushuang saw that he wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked towards the black-clothed man's direction. The black-clothed man lowered his head even more. When this subordinate entered the city, I discovered quite a few experts. They all seem to have come from the capital. They should be the 4 great clans' death warriors. Only, this subordinate doesn't understand why they came to Armament City. Jing Wushuang's fingers paused. He lifted his eyes and looked towards the bright crescent moon. This capital's sky is about to change. Some people can't hold themselves back. Young master's meaning is that their target is the 3rd prince? The black-clothed man was so shocked that his eyelids jumped. However, he knew that the Jing family had always stood on the neutral side and never participated in the matters between them. However, he also couldn't help but say that those old men's guts were really too big. They actually dared to come and assassinate the 3rd prince. However, he also received news that the 3rd prince came out by himself. He didn't bring anyone by his side. No wonder the young master said that the capital's sky was about to change. This time, the 3rd prince was afraid that the odds were against him. Chapter 131. At night, the fire Qilin in the fantasy space suddenly opened its eyes. Its red pupils flashed with a bright light. Baligaju was lying on the carved wooden bed. Both of his hands were placed in front of his chest. His posture was as elegant as a noble sleeping in an ancient castle. However, he was not asleep. Under the silver mask, his long and narrow eyes exuded a faint chill. Swish! Countless swords fell from the top of his head. Baligaju's cold eyes narrowed. He did not move at all. All the swords seemed to be suspended in the air. Then, Baligaju's eyes twitched. As if he had a reaction, those swords broke into pieces and turned into powder. The black-robed men were shocked. They looked at each other. Their bodies turned and landed on the ground. They were just about to launch a second attack. However, they saw the man turn his hand. Those swords seemed to be controlled by someone and stabbed towards them. The black-robed men stretched out their hands to block. Their whole body took a step back. Their throat was sweet, and their internal organs were in pain. This person, he actually recovered his martial chi. The black-robed men once again exchanged glances. They wanted to send this news out. Want to run? Bailey Jiaju's extremely cold and stern voice was decisive. He pinched the neck of one of the people and slowly lifted him up. The action was full of murderous intent, but when he did it, it had a kind of indescribable beauty. Only a cracking sound was heard. Bailey Jiaju flung the limp man in his hand away. His pair of eyes were so calm that it made everyone feel terrified. Bailey Jiaju, you? The leader of the black-clothed men saw that Bailey Jiaju's raised hand emitted waves of martial chi. Immediately, he was shocked and angry, but he had misgivings about Bailey Jiaju's powerful killing power when he raised his hand, so he unconsciously stepped back. Is this lord's name something you can casually call out? Baligaju sneered. This time, he only moved his finger slightly. His indifferent look was simply unbearable. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the black-clothed man, who had retreated several meters away, shrieked and fell to the ground. Everyone's expression changed. At this moment, even though the men in black had the advantage in numbers, they didn't dare to face Baligaju's heaven-defying attack head-on, because no one had informed them that the third prince had recovered his martial chi. However, since they were planning to assassinate the third prince, they would not let it end so simply. It was as if there was no end to the black-robed men, as they rushed in wave after wave. The beautiful young man whose mouth was gagged narrowed his eyes as he watched the continuous slaughter. His thin lips that were originally curled up slowly stiffened. No, something was wrong. These were not the Han family soldiers who had come to save him. At first, he thought that they were his own people, because they were wearing the special clothes of the Han family. But when the sword fell beside him, the beautiful young man cursed in his heart, "Mother." He was only informing them so that they could teach his brother a lesson. He didn't ask them to cut him down. Furthermore, if they were truly the guards of the Han family, it was impossible for them to not recognize him. Ugh. The pretty boy moved his face and spat out the smelly sock in his mouth with great difficulty. "Brother, they are not the Han family's people." Just as his voice fell, the sound of horse hooves could be heard, echoing clearly in the empty alley. Hellion Vivian, who was walking back, turned around and pressed her back against the wall, listening to the sound getting closer and closer. A woman. Yuan Ming also pricked up his ears, and his expression changed. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment, then directly jumped onto the roof. Looking up, she saw a cloud of dust rolling in, as thousands of soldiers and horses galloped towards the inn. These soldiers and horses should be the soldiers stationed in the area, otherwise, it would be impossible for them to be mobilized in such a short period of time. But to mobilize such a large number of soldiers at night, it could only mean one thing: they wanted to secretly kill someone. Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed as she secretly cursed in her heart. "This is bad. Woman, why are you running so fast?" Yuan Ming looked at the large number of soldiers approaching. "Woman, what do you want to do?" She clearly knew that it was dangerous, yet she still ran back. Hellion Vivian did not turn her head as she lightly said, "The third prince is waiting for me, that's why he is staying in the inn. But there are so many soldiers." Yuan Ming's voice was evil. "With your current strength, you won't be able to deal with them." Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. "That's not necessarily true." The sound of horse hooves came closer, and the cloud of dust rolled. In the blink of an eye, over 10,000 soldiers had arrived in front of them. Baligaju stood at the front of the inn, his expression as indifferent as usual. His long phoenix eyes slightly narrowed, and his thin lips curled up, revealing a faint, cold smile. When Hellion Vivian arrived, she saw this scene. What kind of situation was this? But this person could still smile. Moreover, his expression did not change at all, as if everything around him did not enter his eyes. The third prince was just like the rumors said. Nothing could break the innate elegance that came from his body. even if the current situation was very unfavorable for them. Hellion Vivian moved her gaze away from Beligaju and looked forward. The sound of horse hooves suddenly stopped because they had already arrived at the entrance of the inn. Hellion Vivian raised her hand, preparing to fight, but Beligaju forcefully pulled her into his arms, protecting her behind his back. Hellion Vivian was stunned for a moment, not knowing what to feel for a moment. Kill. The general in full armor gave the order, and the inn, which was not very big, was instantly surrounded by a tide of armored cavalry. Thousands of people surrounded them at the same time. 3 layers formed 3 layers. Even if the people in the inn grew wings, they would not be able to fly out. Killing intent enveloped the entire inn, and the situation was on the verge of exploding. Today's situation was clearly a planned attack. The other party's intention was very clear. They did not want Beligaju to return to the capital alive. Heh! In the midst of the crisscrossing murderous aura, Wei Wei clearly heard the man standing by her side laugh in a low voice. However, that laughter clearly carried killing intent. In the blink of an eye, the soldiers who were surrounding them fell down in rows, as if a forest had been ravaged by a strong wind. None of the soldiers who were near them were spared. Hellion Vivian could not help but be shocked. This kind of terrifying attack power, only the third prince could do it. The legendary gold level 10. Attack from the woman beside him. A man in black shouted from afar. It was clear that he was the leader of these people, and he was quite smart. However, they miscalculated one thing, and that was that the person they wanted to attack was not a weak woman. Chapter 132. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth curled up. She raised her hand, and an umbrella appeared out of thin air. With a beautiful twist of her wrist, countless weapons fell down along with the rain. Then, she heard a few miserable screams. No one was able to touch her at all. Instead, they were beaten up by her to the point that even standing up was a problem. Beligaju glanced in her direction, and a light smile appeared in his eyes. That smile had a bit of ambiguity in it. She didn't know if it was unintentional or intentional. He reached out his hand and pulled her back. His tone was indifferent. "You stained me?" Only then did Wei Wei react. His Highness was obsessed with cleanliness. She didn't understand it all. It's normal to be splashed with blood during fighting and killing. Someone like him who killed a large number of people and didn't even have the slightest bit of blood on his body was actually an anomaly. Let's go. Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes and pulled Hellion Wei Wei over. He knew this group of people too well. This group of people had always been ruthless and did not leave the slightest bit of leeway. Therefore, they would definitely not let this matter go. Hellion Vivian also noticed this, because more and more people were surrounding them. It was as if they couldn't kill them all. The other side even had rocket launchers. Even if they had 3 heads and 6 arms, it wouldn't be easy to dodge this kind of attack. Hellion Vivian looked at the slowly approaching black-clothed people. She knew that they were all specially trained experts. They came with the determination to win. Nothing good would come out of a head-on confrontation. It was better to let the third prince go. She would stay behind to deal with the aftermath and look for an opportunity to escape. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment. Then, she whispered to Beligaju, "You go first." This Highness doesn't want to listen to your extremely stupid method." Beligaju didn't wait for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking. He glared fiercely at Hellion Vivian. There was an undisguised coldness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian was slightly surprised. With the third prince's intelligence, he definitely understood what she meant. He was also very clear that this was indeed beneficial to everyone. But why didn't he do that? Hellion Vivian looked up and was about to say something. Then, he was picked up from behind and carried on a shoulder. A slightly indifferent voice sounded in his ear. "If you have time to be long-winded, why don't you hurry up and leave?" Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Hellion Vivian was carried by His Highness with one hand as he fought with the other. No matter how many people attacked him, Beligaju did not stop. His steps were graceful, but his speed was astonishing. Hellion Vivian weakly patted the man's thin but familiar shoulder. She couldn't wait to take a bite. The assassins in black rushed forward one by one and attacked her and Beligaju mercilessly. When the first group of black-clothed men fell, another group would rush up from behind. No one knew how many people the other party had prepared. After a long battle, even if she and Beligaju were made of iron, they would not be able to hold on. In the beginning, it was Beligaju who was carrying her. Behind them, it was the two of them who were back to back. The archers started to release arrows. More and more arrows were released, densely packed. Hellion Vivian was worried that those swords would injure Beligaju. She quickly turned around and helped him block those fire arrows. The black-clothed man standing to the side seemed to have long anticipated that Hellion Vivian would make such a move. Taking advantage of the time when she was protecting Beligaju, the sword in his hand changed direction and stabbed straight at Hellion Vivian. Beligaju's gaze paused. He grabbed Hellion Vivian and turned around, quickly bringing her to the side to avoid the black-clothed man. However, the fire arrow pierced straight into his arm. "Master!" The fire Qilin, who had hurriedly rushed back, cried out in alarm. It was as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were swaying, shaking the entire armament city. Hellion Vivian was even more stunned. Seeing the blood that gushed out and quickly dyed her clothes black, her heart suddenly tightened. She reached out to resist the second wave of attack and kicked that black-clothed man several meters away. "There's poison on the arrow." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and looked at that black blood. The light in her eyes changed. "It's the cultivation scattering powder." The cultivation scattering powder was an extremely vicious poison. Especially for martial artists, it would rob a person of all their martial chi. According to reason, this kind of poison should not appear in the Dragon War Empire, because it had been clearly banned. However, unexpectedly, there were still people who used it. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's arm that was almost a foot away. Hundreds of thoughts ran through her mind thousands of times. Those black-clothed men madly rushed over. Even though they feared the sudden appearance of the fire Qilin, they also knew that once their master was injured, no matter how fierce the mythological beast was, it would be unable to resonate with their master. Not only that, as long as the third prince used his martial chi again, his martial chi value would rapidly decline. Once it reached the critical point, they didn't need to do anything. The third prince would be bitten back by the mythological beast contract, and his meridians would be broken. This was also the reason why these black-clothed men were unbridled and relentlessly pursued. Beligaju tightly grasped the sword in his hand. His long and narrow eyes deepened. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian paused. Her fingers also tightened. She knew that as long as Beligaju used his martial chi, the poison would quickly spread. The poison in his body would quickly enter his body. When that time came, he was afraid that she absolutely couldn't let him lose all his martial chi because of her. Hellion Vivian's always indifferent and lazy eyes suddenly became piercingly cold and sharp. "Yuan Ming." She used her consciousness to summon her own familiar. Her eyes slightly flashed like a demon. "I command you as your master to kill them all." Yuan Ming licked his thin lips. "Then what about their souls?" "To be nourishment for you." As soon as Hellion Vivian's voice fell, her long hair slightly moved. The surrounding air seemed to have some changes, little by little spreading in all directions. The black-clothed men were all stunned. They couldn't take another step forward. Their eyes couldn't open because of the strong wind, so they could only stretch out their hands to block. Then, at this moment, Hellion Vivian grabbed Beligaju's arm. Her whole body was like an unsheathed sword, directly piercing towards the center of the black-clothed men. Wherever she went, no one was lucky enough to escape. Those black-clothed men only saw a flash of silver light in front of their eyes. It was as if someone used a hand to choke their throat. When they reacted, they were already dead. A strong wind suddenly rose, which made the black-clothed men's commander confused. They didn't know where they were at all. In less than 10 seconds, a tornado swept past. When they opened their eyes again, the dead people in front of them were all their own people. As for the third prince, they didn't know where he went. But the only thing they were sure of was that those two people didn't run far, because the tornado disappeared around here. The black-clothed men's judgment was correct. Hellion Vivian and Beligaju didn't run too far. Hellion Vivian's body had limited physical strength. If it wasn't for today's siege, she wouldn't have used the martial and devil dual cultivation technique. Firstly, it was because it consumed too much martial chi. Secondly, it was because if a discerning person saw her technique, they would know that it was related to the devil. And in Dragon War Empire, devil cultivators were not allowed. Chapter 133. When dealing with devil cultivators, the 4 great clans would immediately exterminate them. Even the Imperial clan was against devil cultivators, because there was such a legend in the Dragon War Empire. Legend has it that for thousands of years, the Divine Continent was not ruled by real humans. Instead, it was ruled by a man with devil blood flowing in his veins. But he was not interested in power. No matter how prosperous the outside world was, it had nothing to do with him. He only lived in his palace, had an appearance and eternal life that everyone envied, and sat on top of all the devils in the world. Whether it was divine beasts or humans, they all worshipped him. They wanted to get close to him, but at the same time, they revered him in their hearts. But humans could not be controlled by a devil forever. So the aristocratic family sent another girl to get close to this man. The girl did not dare to believe that in this world, there was such a noble person other than herself. He only sat on the throne and did not even look at her. Noble and indifferent, he looked at the gloomy forest outside the window. Half of his face was propped up, and with a casual smile, it made the world lose its face. The girl fell in love with this man, but in the end, in order to obtain the entire divine continent, she chose to betray him. She gathered 4 powerful monks from the Buddhist and Taoist sects, and with their blood and lives as a guide, she set up 4 demon-slaying seals along the divine continent's mountain range in the north, south, east, and west. The Taoist scriptures recorded the history like this. At that time, the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked, ghosts cried and gods howled, and blood rained down from the sky for 7 days and 7 nights. The demons fell into the yellow springs, never to see the light of day again. It was to trap the man, because the girl knew how strong the man was. As long as he was slightly weaker, she would not be able to suppress him. Not to mention, he still had the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Qilin by his side. Just like that, the man disappeared, and even the 4 great divine beasts, the fire Qilin, were seriously injured and raised in the spirit forest. People wanted to tame it countless times, and even wanted to use a divine beast contract to restrict it, but they were always bitten back. When the fire Qilin appeared again, the 4 great clans panicked, because it was said that the person chosen by the fire Qilin would very likely become a generation's king. Humans were like this. When it came to their own interests, they would always do what was most beneficial to them, and even kill them. The 3rd prince did not go to the devil cultivator, and they treated him like this. If others knew that she had the devil's emissary, she wondered what those people would do to her. That's why Wei Wei didn't order Yuan Ming around all this time in order to avoid being discovered. Now, she could only hope that the 3rd prince didn't notice anything because her actions were too fast. As Hellion Vivian thought of this, she looked in the man's direction. She saw that there was something wrong with his eyes. It was as if he couldn't see anything. How could this be? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The cultivation dissipation powder did not have the effect of blinding people. Beligaju said faintly, "The poison from 10 years ago has relapsed." "You're talking about the fire in the palace." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. These people from the 4 great clans were really vicious and merciless. "Give me your hand." Regardless of the poison in the past, she had to treat his current wounds first. Beligaju paused, then handed over his left hand. Hellion Vivian tore his sleeve into pieces. She knew that the poison was very strong, but she did not expect that it would penetrate so quickly. There was no time. The skin around the wound was slowly turning black. She must immediately think of a way. If she had the tools at hand, she could also do a small operation for him. She had too many disguised identities, so holding a scalpel was not a big deal for her. But now, not only did she not have any tools, those black-clothed people had not left, and they would find them in a short time. However, this kind of poison could not be delayed. If it was delayed, the 3rd prince may be crippled. Hellion Vivian tasted what it was like to be a waste in the Dragon War Empire. This body reminded her almost every day. Because she did not know martial chi, she was humiliated. Bailey Jiaju had already lost his martial chi once because of the fire in the past. Hellion Vivian knew that it was easy for people to go from low to high, and from high to low. No one would know the pain in her heart. Not to mention a cold perfectionist like Baligaju. In the end, if it were not for her, he would definitely be able to avoid that arrow. Hellion Vivian looked up. His pair of beautiful eyes had lost their usual indifference and coldness. There was no reflection in them. Under her hand was a man's skin that was not hot like before. Hellion Vivian was shocked by the heat coming from his body. He had a fever, and the temperature was shockingly high. You have a fever. When did this happen? She wanted to know if the change in his body temperature was related to the cultivation dissipation powder. Bailey Jiaju looked deeply at her, who was almost a foot away from him. The two of them were very close to each other. Because she wanted to avoid being searched by the men in black, she simply sat in his arms and was more obedient than ever. However, fever? No matter what, Bailey Jiaju was always cold and indifferent. Am I having a fever? Hellion Vivian heard this and was almost speechless. Did he not even know when he had a fever? How about this? I'll ask in a different way. When did you feel a headache? Hellion Vivian watched the man press his long eyebrows with his slender fingers. While rolling up his long sleeves, he sorted out his thoughts. Baligaju looked at her expressionlessly. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched twice. Don't tell me you don't even know when you have a headache. I know. His Highness gave her 2 words very casually. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She could finally communicate. When was that? The day you ran away. His Highness did not even change his tone of voice. His elegance had a self-proclaimed coldness. Hellion Vivian. At this time, the third prince was still in the mood to choke her. Was he trying to make her feel even more guilty? No. The third prince should not have that kind of character. Hellion Vivian restrained her emotions. So, you have been burning for 3 days and 2 nights. How could there be such a person? The world was right. The third prince was not a person. He was a god. I don't know. Baligaju turned his face to the side. His motionless expression showed indifference, letting the wound ooze blood. That's it. It seems that the situation is not so bad. At least the cultivation dissipation powder's poison is not so deep. Hellion Wei's eyes turned, and her line of sight fell on Bailey Jiaju's hand. She didn't think too much about it. Instead, she fiercely exhaled and then quickly bent down. Chapter 134. Baligaju's fingers paused. His cold, thin lips parted as he looked at Hellion Vivian, who had placed her thin lips on his arm to help him absorb the poison. Suddenly, his eyes congealed and he directly pushed the person to the side. He forcefully pressed down on her wrist, his voice indifferent. Do you know what kind of poison this is? Even if you indiscriminately suck it in. Cultivation scattering powder. Bah! Hellion Vivian spat out a mouthful of black blood that she had just sucked out. She carelessly met his eyes. It's only a little less martial chi. When the time comes, I'll just cultivate again. Hey, I say, Your Highness, can't you just be an obedient blind person? His eyes couldn't see, yet his strength was still so great. Sure enough, he wasn't human. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She was prepared to wait for an opportunity to continue sucking out the poisoned blood for him. Baligaju directly used his left hand to press against her head. This Highness sees that you don't want to live anymore. Yes, yes, yes. Wait until you have the strength to kill my 9 generations. Hellion Vivian leaned over while her mouth vaguely said, It's best to kill all of those people from the Hellion family. That would also save her from wasting her own strength. Baligaju's eyes seemed to slightly flash as he looked at the hairy little head in front of him. In the depths of his eyes, there seemed to be a faint trace of gentleness. Don't look at how this woman was normally vicious and merciless. When she was well-behaved, she actually looked quite pleasing to the eye. All right, it's about time. Hellion Vivian continuously sucked in a few mouthfuls of black blood, spitting it out on the ground. She looked at the wound. However, this is only temporary. We must find a place as soon as possible to help you clean up the remaining poison. After she finished speaking, She again continuously spat out 2 mouthfuls of black blood. Her lips were somewhat numb, and she felt some martial chi drain. However, it couldn't be considered much. Just like she said, when the time came, it would be fine to cultivate again. On the contrary, Yuan Ming evilly laughed. Woman, you're really generous to this third prince. It can't be that you've fallen in love with him, right? Hellion Vivian chuckled and replied silently, You always say that I have feelings for you. Until now, do I have feelings for you? Maybe it's because you feel that I don't like you that you decided to take a step back and choose the third prince. Yuan Ming's narcissism was directly proportional to his age. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Wake up, will you? No matter how bad your eyes are, they all know that you're the second best. Even if the third prince was an evildoer, he was still a perfect evildoer. The others were indeed no match for him. Hellion Vivian's gaze then fell on Beligaju's side profile. She wondered what this evildoer looked like. It was said that the fire had disfigured the third prince. That was why the third prince wore a silver mask all year round. Except for a very small number of people, no one could see his true face. In the past, Hellion Vivian had believed this rumor. But now, Hellion Vivian felt that with this evildoer's style, his face shouldn't have been disfigured. It was very possible that this was a smokescreen deliberately released by the man. It was said that curiosity could kill the cat. The more Hellion Vivian looked at the man in front of her, the more her heart itched. Because the two of them were in an especially close position, the tip of her nose was filled with the man's pleasant smell of sandalwood. It faintly lingered in the surroundings, as if it could cover a person in a small world. No matter how chaotic the situation outside was, no matter how dangerous it wouldn't reveal the slightest trace on his body. On the contrary, it would give people a kind of indifference as if he held the world in his hands. Hellion Vivian's eyes moved. Although she knew that the situation wasn't right, she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to get close to the third prince and see what he looked like. Thinking like this, Hellion Vivian cautiously raised her hand and was just about to quickly remove that silver mask. But the man's hand turned around and pressed down on her wrist. His voice was deep and heavy. Not being honest again? We're trapped here, so we have to find something to do. Hellion Vivian pretended to be regretful and said, Thinking about it, I'm so young, and I'm about to be surrounded and killed. Before I die, I have to know what the people around me look like. Beligaju listened to her roguish tone, and his thin lips slowly curved up. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his breath hit her left ear little by little. He said with a deep meaning, You definitely don't want to see this king's appearance. I'm a person who doesn't care much about beauty or ugliness. It was pure curiosity that caused trouble. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders and continued to be eager to try. Beligaju laughed in a low voice. It was cold and indifferent, but it also had a playful feeling that Hellion Vivian didn't understand. Then he said, The person who takes off this king's mask will have to accompany this king for a lifetime. Are you sure you want to take it off? When Hellion Vivian heard this, she immediately pulled back her hand. Bailey Jiaju naturally sensed her movements. His originally empty eyes suddenly sank fiercely, and the corners of his mouth were also dyed with a faint iciness. She couldn't avoid him at all costs. He had just thought that she was very obedient. It seemed like everything was just an illusion. A fox was always very cunning, so he couldn't let down his guard against her. Thinking of this, Beligaju raised his numb hand and pressed it against his forehead. When Hellion Vivian saw his movements, she retracted her hand and reached out again. But she didn't lift his silver mask and still put the back of her hand on his forehead. Her hand was very cool. When it was placed on his burning forehead, it made the slightly uncomfortable Beligaju slightly relax his long eyebrows. And Hellion Vivian was scalded by that temperature. The fever didn't reach his legs, and his body temperature kept rising. Even if the third prince wasn't human, he still needed to be treated as soon as possible. Hellion Vivian had just opened her mouth when she heard the sound of footsteps from not far away. Those people were coming. Hellion Vivian's breathing became sluggish. Before the flying arrows arrived, she quickly stretched out her fingers and an umbrella appeared out of nowhere. With a sweep of her long legs, 3 or 4 black, clothed people fell to the ground together. Let's go. Helly and Vivian wanted to pull Beligaju up, but she saw him standing there, unhurriedly using his fingers to brush off the dust that wasn't on his body. His voice was as indifferent as before. No need. And? Helly and Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju pulled her back with a pair of indifferent eyes. His voice carried a trace of evil that had never been there before. We can also compete with them in terms of numbers. Just as the man's voice fell, Helly and Vivian saw that not far away, countless war horses were galloping from the distance. Those people were all wearing black riding clothes. Their faces were black, and their hands were holding swords. They were like a black wind that swept over. Everywhere they went, there was blood. However, the man just stood in this bloody scene without even blinking. He didn't even care about the slightest bit of dust. He was always so clean and cold like a high and mighty god. But Helly and Vivian knew that he was never a soft-hearted god. He was a demon. Chapter 135. It's the Shadow Guards. Why would they appear here? Didn't they say that the third prince didn't bring a single person? The men in black looked at each other in dismay. Clearly, they were caught off guard by this sudden situation. They looked at the cavalrymen who were flanking them from both sides and dropped the swords in their hands. They wanted to seize the opportunity to escape. But how could Beligaju allow this to happen? He stood at the entrance of the wind and looked down at this scene from a high vantage point. He calmly and unhurriedly took out a white handkerchief and wiped away the bloodstains on Wei Wei's fingers. His thin lips slightly curved. Kill. It was only one word, but Helly and Vivian could feel an unprecedented sense of oppression. The black mass of cavalrymen swept past, bringing along the sound of martial chi with them. This was the legendary Ghost Palace, killing 3,000 crows, not leaving a single one alive. Helly and Vivian almost suspected that the third prince was doing this on purpose. He was deliberately waiting for the black-clothed people to come out before he mobilized the cavalry to surround and kill them. Just as she was thinking this, Helly and Vivian felt a weight on her shoulder. The man who was originally standing there suddenly leaned on her shoulder. Helly and Vivian moved her hands and propped him up. She didn't care about the shadow guards who were leading the cavalry and wanted to drag the third prince away from here first. Beligaju tried his best to hold on to his last bit of willpower. His voice was extremely cold. Tell them to leave one alive for this highness. Kill the rest without mercy. Okay. Helly and Vivian listened to the man's cold voice and raised her eyebrows. She once again sighed at the abnormal physical strength of a certain highness. At this time, the fire Qilin also came over. Because the owner's weakness would be returned to the divine beast 10 times, the fire Qilin's condition didn't look very good. But this didn't affect its ability to bite those black-clothed people who tried to get close to Helly and Vivian and the others. It basically crushed them to death with one claw. However, it didn't continue to fight. In its heart, only the safety of its master was the most important. How is master? Such a huge divine beast suddenly opened its mouth to speak. Helly and Vivian felt that the originally unstable road was trembling even more. She glanced at it and said, "Bend down." The fire Qilin had never been ordered by anyone other than its master, so it was somewhat stunned. Wei Wei immediately pressed down on its big head. After that, she dragged Bailey Jiaju up. After that, she nimbly flipped over, her voice neither soft nor soft. Third prince needs treatment. First, go find a quieter place. It's best if there's hot water and a bed. The fire Qilin took a deep look at Helly and Vivian. It had seen many different types of women, but it had never seen one as calm as Helly and Vivian. The fire Qilin didn't say anything else and displayed its divine beast nature. It spread out its 4 limbs, and its large wings spread out from both sides. It was tall and sturdy like the war horse of the Grim Reaper in comics. When the fire Qilin flew, there would be a strong wind. Helly and Vivian could only grab onto its red fur, but she only had one thought in her heart. If there was a chance in the future, she would definitely tell the winged beast that had once carried her that their boss' beautiful fur wasn't soft at all. Moreover, when it flew, it was a bit too irritable. The people sitting on its back couldn't even open their eyes because of its flashing wings. It was also because of the fire Qilin that Helly and Vivian and the others quickly found a suitable place to treat their injuries. Hellion Vivian didn't forget what Beligaju had just instructed her. She turned her head towards the fire Chelan and said, "Go tell those shadows. Leave one alive for investigation. Kill the rest without mercy." This was the second time this woman had ordered it. The fire Chelan calmly moved its claws, its voice without the slightest ripple. "Those things, young Master Han can do them all. The most important thing now is to heal Master." "Young Master Han?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Little tyrant?" She really imagined the appearance of a beautiful youth brandishing a sword and playing with a spear. However, since the fire Chelan had said so, it meant that the youth wasn't as simple as he looked on the surface. Hellion Vivian gathered her thoughts and put them on Beligaju's wound. Even the skin there had turned black, and the surrounding muscles had begun to show signs of stiffness. The poison that she had just suppressed by sucking blood had begun to spread again. The cultivation scattering powder's poison wasn't easy to detoxify, and they wouldn't be able to find the antidote in a short time. Even if the third prince had ordered to leave one alive, that person didn't seem to have the antidote on him. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and decided to do it herself. The third prince has been poisoned by the cultivation scattering powder. Ordinary medicine simply can't treat it. You go prepare a bucket of hot water, a jar of newer hong, a few pieces of white cloth, as well as a needle and thread bag. I'll need them in a while. Hellion Vivian ordered the fire Chelan with a clear mind. She didn't forget to take out a pill from her bosom and put it into Beligaju's mouth. This time, the fire Chelan didn't care about the taste of her orders. It quickly transformed into its human form and prepared all the things that Hellion Vivian wanted it to prepare. Hellion Vivian took the things and skillfully pulled up her long sleeves, rolling them up a few times, exposing her snow-white wrists. She reached out to tear all the clothes on Beligaju's body to shreds. She didn't expect that the royal's sense of defense was more powerful than she had imagined. Just as her fingers were about to touch his chest, he suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with an unusual light, as if he was going to tear her apart with his own hands if she were to get any closer. His eyes were filled with a thick, evil aura. When he saw that the person in front of him was her, those deep eyes gradually recovered their calm. His voice was hoarse and low. "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you a small operation." Hellion Vivian didn't mind his vigilance. She was the same. She would never let anyone get close to her, especially when she was injured. She would be more aggressive than usual because she needed to protect herself. Like the third prince, who was finally chased from time to time and was betrayed by his personal maid, it was estimated that he would be even more like this. So Hellion Vivian raised her hands and let him see the silver knife and needle in her hands. Then she continued, "You were unconscious just now. Since you are awake now, you can take it off yourself. It will save me the trouble of doing it." The fire Chelan's eyes turned round when he heard this. This woman ordered him, but she even dared to order his master. Was she afraid that his master would be impatient and cut off her claws? The fire Chelan touched his chin, but he saw his master just raise his eyebrows. Then, he really slowly untied the fur robe. His chest was exposed, and his honey-colored skin was plated with a layer of silver under the moonlight. It was like flowing satin, storing an astonishing explosive power. Chapter 136. Hellion Vivian had always thought that the third prince's figure would be very good, but she didn't expect it to be so good to the point that it was pleasing to the eye. She suddenly felt that he should find a chance to go to the fragrant garden or something. He would definitely be able to sell for a good price. Saliva. The man's cold voice rang in her ears. If that kind of self-centered sitting posture were to be taken out, the group of noble ladies in the capital would definitely faint again. However, the third prince always liked to have a poisonous tongue, which was not desirable for her. Let him have his poisonous tongue. Later, she would charge him more surgery fee. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's mouth curved into a smile. She reached out and took out the needle and thread, then smoked it under the oil lamp. Her movements were very professional, so fast that it made people dazzled. After the silver needle was done, Hellion Vivian wiped the man's body temperature. It was actually higher than before. She didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing that he could still stay awake with a fever like this. If the other party was unconscious, she could use the knife on his body without any scruples. But he was awake, so she had to carefully serve him. She couldn't take the opportunity to see what he looked like. Hellion Vivian felt uncomfortable and secretly decided to double the surgery fee. Drink the newer Hong, it can stop the pain. Hellion Vivian swept away the indifference and leisurely from before. She tied up the scattered hair again and carefully fixed the strands that were scattered around his ears. Her whole body emitted a cautious and evil aura. Lie down. Lie down? Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. A pair of long and narrow eyes stopped at the bayonet in Hellion Vivian's hand. Hellion Vivian met his gaze and thin lips curved. You can also sit down, but it will hurt more when you use the knife. Beligaju faintly hummed, but didn't do anything. Hellion Vivian understood his meaning and didn't say anything more. She directly took the wine and drank a mouthful, but didn't swallow it. Instead, she sprayed it all on Beligaju's wound. Following that, she picked up the silver knife and ruthlessly cut along the lines of his muscles. Bailey Jiaju's thin lips tightened as his line of sight moved upwards. A delicate and pretty little face was reflected in his clear peach blossom eyes. Being stared at by the man like this, Hellion Vivian didn't panic at all. She dug out the arrowhead and began to clean the wound with cold wine. After cleaning it, she picked up a needle and stitched up Beligaju's wound. When Beligaju saw this, a faint light flashed in his cold eyes. He had seen countless famous doctors, but he had never seen such a treatment method. Was there such a treatment method in the Divine Land? Beligaju's eyes darkened as he asked casually, "What do you think of possession?" Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but her hands remained calm as she continued, "I haven't studied it. Could it be that this man had discovered something?" Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. In the Divine Land, the most forbidden thing was possession. The so-called possession was a change of soul from the original body. It was basically the same as her current situation. The possessor would be burned in a raging fire for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't want to be treated as some kind of demon. That's why she hid everything and didn't even disclose her identity as the owner of profound heavens. Although that would bring her a lot of convenience, at the same time, there would be people watching her. Hellion Guangyao wasn't stupid. Even Hellion Jiaoer had a bit of brain. It was impossible for a person to change so much in one night. She had to take it slow and let them think that other than her change in temperament, everything else was obtained by luck. Only this way could she avoid unnecessary trouble. However, she didn't understand what the third prince meant by asking her this. Did he discover her? Or was he just casually chatting? Because after the third prince finished speaking, he didn't continue this topic. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and didn't show any abnormalities in front of this man. What if this man was just swindling her? After all, this man loved to do this kind of thing the most. Hellion Vivian decided not to think about anything and just pretended that she didn't hear anything. She continued to lower her head and concentrated on bandaging him. Beligaju slowly withdrew his line of sight from Hellion Vivian's face. His long and narrow eyes were filled with deep meaning. Hellion Vivian thought for a while and felt that something was wrong. She paused and raised her head. "Your eyes can see now." And Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he responded. Hellion Vivian frowned. "When can I see?" Beligaju glanced sideways and deeply looked at her. His tone was neither fast nor slow. "When you peeked at my body just now." Hellion Vivian was speechless. When did she peek at his body? He made her sound so evil. She was openly admiring him. Okay. Only this man could say such words in such an indifferent manner. She simply couldn't have a pleasant conversation. Hellion Vivian grinned, revealing 2 small dimples. Although her smile was sweet, it definitely wasn't harmless. "Oh, right. I forgot to tell your highness. It will hurt even more later." Hellion Vivian didn't do it on purpose. Once the alcohol's anesthesia wore off, the cut would start to hurt. In addition, Beligaju still had a fever. It was possible that the wound would cause him to fall into a coma. It was a good thing that it hurt a little. She was afraid that when the time came, he would be confused by the fever and wouldn't even feel pain. Hellion Vivian thought of this and soaked the handkerchief in the alcohol. She didn't care about the difference between men and women. Seeing that the man's spirits were low, she would use alcohol to wipe his body. This was the best way to reduce the fever. Thus, for the entire night, Helly and Vivian did the same thing, soaking the handkerchief and wiping Beligaju's joints. Sometimes, she would even observe his wound. Gradually, Helly and Vivian couldn't resist the urge to sleep. She sat on the bed and fell asleep, holding the white handkerchief in her hand. After Beligaju's fever subsided, this was the scene he saw. Hellion Wei's little head was about to droop down bit by bit. The man's deep and narrow eyes deepened. Just as that head was about to hit the bed, Beligaju's well-defined right hand gently covered her head and successfully pressed her into his embrace. As if she was finally comfortable, Hellion Vivian rubbed her small face and found a comfortable position. Like a cat, her thin lips curled up. Beligaju watched this scene and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. The next morning, the wind was gentle and the birds were chirping. Hellion Vivian opened her eyes and saw a golden ray of sunlight shining in, causing her to slightly squint her eyes. Just as she was about to get up and move around, she found that she seemed to be pressing down on something hard. She slightly raised her eyes to look and saw that she was pressing down on the third prince. Chapter 137. Beligaju's masked face glowed with a faint silver light under the sunlight. He was so handsome that it was somewhat dazzling. Only, his temperament was too calm. He was so indifferent and cold that it made people feel like it was blasphemy to get close to him. Hellion Vivian stared at the man in front of her. Because of the sudden change in scene, she was a bit confused. Her body also stiffened, and she stopped moving. However, while she was lost in thought, Beligaju's cold voice suddenly sounded and instantly pulled her back to reality. If you want to look at this king, then sit properly. This king is uncomfortable with you pressing down on me like this. Every word was like a gem, and there was no trace of sleepiness. Or, are you saying that you just want to throw yourself into my arms? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her eyes moved down and she gave a cool smile. With your highness' current state, you don't have the qualifications to criticize me. And? Beligaju kept his hands behind his head. His lazy appearance made it seem like the one who had a reaction wasn't him at all. He was simply an evildoer among evildoers. Hellion Vivian couldn't compare to the other's face. She pulled back her hands and planned to get up. Beligaju's eyes were half closed as he looked at the woman in front of him. His expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied with losing a pillow. This king still hasn't slept enough. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. What did he mean, this king still hasn't slept enough? What did it have to do with her whether he slept enough or not? Moreover, his posture clearly showed that he wasn't hugging a person, but a pet. How did she look like a pet? Hellion Vivian was just about to use violence to subdue the third prince when she heard a slightly hoarse and deep voice with a unique coldness. In the future, don't snore when you sleep. Hellion Vivian stared at him. How did she snore when she slept? Aside from personal attacks, what else could this third prince do? Isn't it tiring to live in the clouds all day long? What's the point of caring about so many details? Hellion Vivian looked at the man who was close to her and secretly cursed. Even his sleeping posture was so perfect that it was abnormal. He didn't feel tired at all. She had been sleepy for a long time. Anyway, there weren't any extra beds here. After helping His Highness's fever for an entire night, her eyes were a little tired. Hellion Wei adjusted her position and moved closer to the bed to take a nap. But why were the three sovereigns lying down as well? Hellion Vivian thought that a clean freak like him would get up as soon as he woke up, just like last time in Spirit Forest. Looking at the current situation, he did not intend to look for another room. There was a man lying beside her in such an unbridled manner, and the surrounding was filled with the distinct scent of dragon yen sandalwood, with a unique cold aura. Hellion Vivian's line of sight couldn't help but stop at the side of his face with the mask on. The high bridge of his nose, the thin corners of his lips, and the cold lines always gave people the illusion that their hearts would stop beating. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian felt her eyelids become heavy. She simply yawned and went back to sleep. Beligaju still maintained his original position as he lay to the side. Looking at the sleeping Hellion Vivian, His ink-black eyes gradually sank. The sleeping Hellion Wei Wei appeared to be very quiet. What didn't change was still that roguish aura. He didn't know where she learned it from. Her slender and thick eyelashes covered her eyelids, fluttering like a butterfly's wings. Her nose was small and delicate. The black ink on her face was a little smudged. She looked like a stupid fox that fell into the ink. However, Beligaju knew that this fox would only settle down when she was sleeping. Usually, Beligaju's eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's left hand that was placed on his waist. He reached out and pinched Hellion Vivian's palm. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, that action didn't seem like he was pinching a person, but more like he was pinching a pet. Therefore, even now, the third prince was still considering whether or not to directly cripple this pair of scratching claws. Disobedient little thing. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened again as he looked at her slightly cold side profile. He pulled the quilt over and pulled Hellion Wei Wei into his embrace along with the quilt. He also planned to sleep for a while. "Your Highness," Shadow tentatively called inside. In reality, he had already stayed outside for a long time, but he was afraid to disturb his master's rest. What made him surprised was that His Highness could actually tolerate someone else sleeping in the same bed as him. One had to know that His Highness's obsession with cleanliness had reached a certain level. That year, when His Highness tamed the fire Cheelant's beast form, His Highness raised it by his side and they lived together for half a month. After that, no one was able to spend the night by His Highness' side. Could it be that His Highness really intended to raise Miss Hellion as a pet? Or could it be that it was because of other reasons? While Shadow was thinking, Beligaju already stood up. He was still wearing yesterday's ancient long robe. The collar was half open. With a whoosh, he pulled open the wooden door, revealing the abs that would make people jealous. The long robe on the wooden table seemed to be blown up by the wind and steadily fell on the man's shoulder. The long black robe hung straight down, showing off the perfect white skin. It brought a strong visual impact and filled the air with a familiar feeling of asceticism. The wound on his arm not only didn't make him look battered, it instead added a different kind of evil to him than usual. Shadow looked at him like this and his entire person was stunned, combined with the conversation just now, and what Miss Hellion did to His Highness. His Highness, he couldn't have been raped by Miss Hellion, right? No, it definitely couldn't be. He must be thinking too much. Shadow shook his head. Beligaju, wearing a mink fur black robe, had a languid expression as he reclined on the wooden chair at the side. His fingers took off the silver mask, and the bright light shone on his face. One could faintly see the man's incomparably handsome side profile, as if he was the world's most perfect jade sculpture, making people unable to move their line of sight away. "How is it?" Bailey Jiaju extended a hand and picked up the celadone cup on the table. The joints of his hands were clearly defined, contrasting with the delicate porcelain cup. Even the space between his fingers was suffused with a pure and cold radiance like white jade. It was that kind of scholarly thin hand, but it made people feel as if it could hold the entire universe in its palm. Replying to His Highness, only one was left alive. The news was also released, saying that they provoked young Master Han. Shadow knelt on the ground and respectfully replied. The man indifferently sipped a mouthful of tea, his black eyes slightly drooping, not knowing where he was looking. He only indifferently ordered, "Continue to watch." "Yes." Shadow responded. "Then, should we tell Miss Hellion about His Highness's identity at White Academy?" Beligaju's finger that was turning the silver mask paused. His expression was indifferent. "No need. Everything is as usual." "Yes." Shadow bowed his head and withdrew. Beligaju once again put the silver mask on his face and walked to the bedside in the inner room. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's cheek. The corners of his mouth curved up devilishly. Chapter 138. When Hellion Vivian woke up again, it was already noon. The third prince was sitting by the window drinking tea. He looked unhurried, as if he was waiting for her to wake up so that he could hurry on with his journey. He had a high fever for several days, but he recovered in just one night. Hellion Vivian had never seen a person with such a strong recovery ability. However, she also didn't care. Lying on the bed and stretching, she looked at Bailey Jiaju and slowly smiled, carrying a clear and cold shrewdness. Since His Highness is well, then let's talk about the matter of the consultation fee. Baligaju didn't say anything. He only raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He lazily leaned against the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His aura was cold and luxurious. He didn't look like he was injured at all. Hellion Vivian took out a small abacus from her space and started to calculate. 1 mouthful of poisonous blood is worth 10 taels. I drank about 7 mouthfuls, so a small operation is worth at least 80 taels. In addition to the night of fever rubbing, I'll give you 100 taels. The rest of the expenses are also 10 taels, so that's a total of 180 taels. Calculating to this point, she frowned. 180 taels? Why does it feel like something is wrong? Oh right, I also fed your highness a pill. I'll charge you 20 taels to round it up. After speaking, without waiting for the man to respond, a pair of slender white hands reached over. The total is 200 taels. Your highness can pay the bill. Bailey Jiaju looked at the lush and delicate fingers in front of his eyes. His extremely deep and dark eyes looked up. The rays of light refracted by the sunlight seemed to fall into his pair of slender peach blossom eyes, bright and moving. 200 taels? This woman really dared to open her mouth like a lion. He raised his eyelids and looked at the pure silver abacus in Hellion Vivian's hand. His voice was faint. Are you short of money? When Hellion Vivian heard this, she felt that there was hope for the money. She nodded and smiled. Baligaju leisurely put down the teacup in his hand. The silver that I won from you seems to be more than 200 taels. Is your highness planning to reconcile the accounts? Hellion Vivian looked at him with clear eyes. That's a separate matter. Baligaju looked at her. After a long while, his thin lips slightly hooked. You really don't know, or pretend not to know. What? Hellion Vivian felt that the third prince's appearance was an insult to her intelligence. Baligaju's eyes were clear and cold. In the Dragon War Empire, after marriage, the property is managed by the wife. Hellion Vivian's outstretched hand paused for a moment. Did the royal mean that she would be in charge of the money in the future? It had to be said that sometimes the royal family, who were indifferent to fame and fortune, also had their cute side. Hellion Vivian took the abacus again. She paused, raised her head and asked, It is said that the Ghost Palace has a lot of rare treasures. Is that true? And Baligaju indifferently responded. There was no change in the expression on his face. Hellion Vivian calculated the abacus. Also, I heard that when you were young, the retired emperor gave you a lot of tungsten and told you to play with it as you pleased? Baligaju nodded. It was just a simple action of drinking tea, but it could be seen that he had a good upbringing. Hellion Vivian was angry in her heart. This was the difference between them. They were both trash. The royal family played with armaments parts like toys. She didn't even know what armaments were. She even foolishly chased after Morong Changfeng to play with them. Thinking carefully, did she count as marrying a tall, rich, and handsome man and walking to the peak of life? Although it was only a contract marriage, everything was fake. But looking at it now, it was really not bad. However, Hellion Vivian wasn't used to doing nothing and only taking advantage of others. She put down the abacus and smiled faintly. Your Highness, how about giving those armaments parts in your hands to me? When the time comes to earn money, we'll split it 50-50. Baligaju finally looked at her. The corners of his mouth curved into a meaningful smile. Okay, then let's sign the contract as soon as possible. Hellion Vivian said as she took a brush from the desk and was about to start writing. In fact, Hellion Vivian felt that her writing was pretty good. At least for a modern Secret Service agent, being able to use a proper brush to write without spilling ink everywhere was already pretty good. But it still made the aloof third prince, who was like a male god, frown. You used this kind of writing to enter White Academy? And? When Hellion Vivian raised her head, her face was smeared with ink. Don't you think that my writing is very artistic? Baligaju sneered. It's really ugly to the point that other people can't understand. Hellion Vivian. Now she finally understood why the third prince chose her. Apart from her skin being more eye-catching at that time, there was another point. It was because the third prince wanted to attack her from time to highlight his own superiority. Probably because he was helpless against her, Beligaju leaned over and held the brush across the back of her hand. He lightly slid the tip of his nose down. Every word was so clear that it could directly be made into a modern copybook. Like moving clouds and flowing water, it also carried a faint domineering aura. The way he held the brush was very bold. He was born with a kind of imposing manner that controlled the overall situation. His writing was also very strong. However, this kind of posture seemed to be hugging her from behind. Helian Wei's long, shapely eyebrows creased, and she wanted to give up her position. Don't move. Bailey Jiaju's chest almost stuck to her back. His long eyebrows knitted as his slender fingertips fell. His voice was clear and cold without the slightest ripple. Done. Then, he stood up straight and looked at her condescendingly, as if he was looking at a stranger. Sure enough, she was overthinking. Helian Vivian curled her lips into a smile and gradually began to look at the contract. Some of them were written by her, and some were added by the third prince. The core idea was still the same, which was to be loving in front of others and be strangers behind them. But there was one point. Wouldn't the scale of the wedding be too big? Did they have to announce it to the world? Helian Vivian's gaze landed on the last clause. Biting the end of the pen, she raised her eyebrows. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just make a more ordinary wedding. The man looked up and casually glanced at her. How can my, Beligaju's, wedding be ordinary? Helian Vivian, then let's do it like this first. When we think of something, we'll add it. Helian Vivian deliberately looked at the clause of husband and wife's obligation. There was the word no written at the end. She was relieved. She took the red rouge and pressed her fingerprint. Then, with a faint smile, she pushed the paper away to Beligaju. The man half raised his eyebrows and looked at Helian Vivian. When she lowered her head, she would always reveal a piece of skin behind her neck. It was very white, very tender, and very easy to bite. Thinking of this, Beligaju's gaze was somewhat unable to move away. This place had been repeatedly lingered on last night. Chapter 139. What's wrong? Helian Vivian didn't understand why the third prince would suddenly look at her with such a gaze. But the sensitive her still sensed danger and subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand. Beligaju was one step ahead of her and pressed down on the paper. His red fingertips fell on the paper, and the imprint was clearly visible. Helian Vivian saw that everything was settled, and her mind relaxed. She stood up and moved her neck, saying, I'm going to tidy up. It could be seen that Helian Vivian was in a good mood. It was indeed like this. Basically, her biggest problem had been solved. The reason why Helian Vivian thought of a contract marriage was because the third prince wasn't easy to deal with. If he became an ally, things would be a lot easier. The second reason was that she hadn't forgotten that this was ancient times. If the retired emperor didn't like her and casually bestowed a marriage upon her because of the third prince, even if she said no, it would be considered as defying the imperial edict. Therefore, she had to think of countermeasures in advance. Now that she had a contract, everything would be done according to the contract in the future. She and the third prince would get along very well. And with this written negotiation, no matter what happened in the future, she would be able to retreat from the imperial palace unscathed. But was it really like this? Helian Vivian didn't know that when she went into the inner room to tidy up. The man sitting on the wooden chair reached out and took the paper. His deep eyes were cold and sharp like ice, as if it could pierce through a person's chest. Every word on this paper indicated that the other party wanted to keep a distance from him. Beligaju curved his cold, thin lips. His slender fingers picked up the ink brush and heavily added a word, stop, under the couple's obligation. Nothing, and stop. That meant that the relationship between husband and wife would never stop. Bailey Jiaju put down the ink brush and slowly folded that piece of paper. His posture was so perfect that it seemed as if all this had never happened before. The thin fog outside the window had already faded, leaving behind only a dim yellow. That was the sign of sunset. Imperial Palace, Main Hall. Emperor Morong stood by the window and pulled the black cloth off his face. He threw it aside with a gloomy expression. We failed. He didn't die. Instead, none of the secret guards we sent out returned. Then what should we do? The woman who was standing at the other end of the hall suddenly raised her head, the hair clip on her head trembling. Father, we don't have much time. The Emperor's health is getting worse and worse. He has played too much. Sooner or later, he will die in the hands of a woman. Yen-er is too young. She doesn't understand anything. If the Emperor left, based on how much the retired Emperor doted on that vile spawn, the throne would definitely be given to Beligaju. This consort can't wait any longer. So this woman was none other than the master of the imperial harem, Empress Murong. She tightly gripped the handkerchief in her hand. Her fingers were dyed red and emitted an unprecedented poison. He must die. Rest assured, Your Highness. Emperor Murong lowered his voice and revealed an ominous glint in his eyes. We couldn't kill him in Armament City, but that doesn't mean we can't kill him when we return to the capital. Empress Murong pinched the handkerchief and frowned. Didn't you say that vile spawn didn't bring anyone? How come none of the secret guards came back? Our people encountered young Master Han. Emperor Murong clenched his left hand. He won't be so lucky next time. Empress Murong's eyes darkened. Father, do you have a good idea? Do you still remember the maid who poisoned him that year? Emperor Murong slowly curved his thin lips. The third prince treated her differently from the others. Empress Murong's eyebrows jumped. Didn't the retired emperor dispose of her on the spot? How come she's still alive? Of course it was me who saved her. Emperor Murong's mouth slowly curved up, carrying a sinister smile. Such a useful chess piece. Of course I have to make the best use of it. Empress Murong also smiled. Since it's like this, I can rest assured. I heard that the maid was a beauty since she was young. Beauty is like poison. These words aren't wrong at all. That vile spawn hasn't chosen a consort for so many years because of her. He's such a love-struck person. Heh, I don't know what they'll be like when they meet. Emperor Murong's fingers slowly rubbed the wooden table. It's impossible for her to kill him again. After all, even if the third prince is dazed for a moment after seeing her, he's not stupid to that extent. Empress Murong's eyes were filled with poison. Then let him fight with the retired emperor for this lovely person. Fight until there's no end to it, just like what the emperor did for me that year. Although it's a bit difficult, with her understanding of the third prince, it shouldn't be difficult. Emperor Murong put down the porcelain cup in his hand. He believed that everyone had a cinnabar mole in their heart. Obviously, the third prince's cinnabar mole was this maid who had accompanied him for countless years in the ice-cold palace. He didn't forget that no matter who it was, they couldn't get close to the third prince. However, this maid would always be treated specially. Emperor Murong curved his thin lips. Moreover, this special treatment would be even more lethal when he grew up. Anyway, Beligaju didn't have martial chi anymore. No matter how smart he was just a teenager. It was just that the retired emperor wasn't very fond of fighting far away, on the west side, in the Taixing Palace. How is it? The retired emperor couldn't help but stand up and ask the secret guard who hurried in from outside. Is Jew all right? The shadow respectfully kneeled on the ground and reported word for word. Don't worry, retired emperor. His Highness has already set off for the capital. There are people following him along the way. Such a thing won't happen again. That's good, that's good. The retired emperor seemed to have aged more than 10 years. He sat back in his seat and reached out to touch his forehead. Did you find out who saved Jewer? The shadow looked up. Retired emperor, it said that young Master Han was also there at that time. Is it really young Master Han? The retired emperor narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Such a fierce style didn't seem like that child's style. Rather, it seemed like. The retired emperor raised his eyebrows. Go to White Academy and investigate everything that Jew has participated in recently. Then tell me the results. Yes. The shadow lowered his eyes. Wait a minute. The retired emperor's eyes deepened. That Hellion girl, what's going on? The shadow stared blankly. The retired emperor asked him like this, but he also didn't know. He didn't serve the royal family. Even if he served the royal family, he was afraid that he also couldn't guess the royal family's thoughts. The retired emperor also seemed to realize that he asked the wrong person. He waved his long sleeve. All right, you can leave. Maybe he was thinking too much. Jew, or was probably just too bored recently and wanted to find a toy for himself. Chapter 140. Early in the morning, in a comfortable carriage. The burning tea would seem to have burned out, making a muffled sound. A light, elegant, and mellow fragrance slowly wafted out from the carved red-gold incense burner, lingering for a long time. This was long yin incense, nourishing the 5 viscera, spleen, and stomach. It was best for the body to smoke in the inner room. If Hellion Vivian's memory wasn't wrong, this long yin incense was her mother's favorite incense in the past. However, after Madame Sue married in, she took away her incense, saying that she couldn't smell it and that it would make her sick. As a result, the entire defense division banned this incense. The servants all knew that this was the newly married second madam giving the first madam a show of strength. However, what did that good father of hers do? He protected Madame Sue in all aspects, saying that her body was weak and couldn't compare to her mother. Madame Sue's body was weak, but her mother's body wasn't weak. At that time, her mother was already at the end of her life, and her chest was puffing out air. A female general of a generation galloping on the battlefield, the true head of the Hellion family, had fallen to the point where she didn't even have the qualifications to light a stick of incense. No one knew what kind of heart-wrenching situation that was. The little Hellion Vivian pinched the corner of her skirt, helplessly watching her own mother live such a pitiful life, but she couldn't do anything. The memories in the depths of her heart made Hellion Vivian tightly shut her eyes. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. No matter what happened in the past, the reborn her will definitely take back all the things that originally belonged to her. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly felt that someone was looking at her. Hellion Vivian immediately restrained her baleful aura and raised her eyes towards the opposite side. Beligaju, wearing a white mink fur robe, had a languid expression as he sat on the armchair. The ancient long robe sleeves were like blooming flowers, contrasting with his jade-like wrists. He flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. His whole body was cold and aloof like jade. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that the third prince's casual movements could be photographed in a magazine. It was a pity that such a person didn't become a star. Probably sensing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju glanced in her direction before opening a small wooden box in the carriage. His slender fingers rummaged through the contents before casually tossing a few pieces of tungsten armament to Hellion Vivian, indicating for her to play with. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows as she fiddled with the tungsten iron in her hand. The rumors were indeed true. Every single thing of the third prince's couldn't be measured by money alone. Even the things he used and ate were the best in the War Dragon Empire. Just by looking at this carriage, one could see a few things. A jade table, candied fruits, tea, snacks, a chessboard, a scroll. Everything was prepared. Every single item was of the highest quality and was not cheap at all. It was luxurious and not just a little bit. Hellion Vivian also didn't hold back. She gracefully pinched a piece of osmanthus cake and put it into her mouth. The cake melted in her mouth, and a rich flavor of mung beans accompanied by a lot of dried pears. The unique taste melted in her mouth, making her squint her eyes in enjoyment. Because she was in the carriage, in addition to the previous night's busyness, Hellion Vivian didn't paint her face with the black juice that would easily cause others to misunderstand her. This made her look extremely beautiful, especially when she smiled. It was dyed with the color of autumn light, lasting for a long time. Ordinary women relied on their gentle beauty to win, but she was different. Every part of her was dyed with charm and a ruffian aura. When her black phoenix eyes looked at people, there was always a faint stubbornness. It turned out that a woman could also have such an impressive appearance, especially those thin lips that were stained with water, appearing somewhat moist, imperceptibly revealing a sense of seduction. Beligaju lowered his eyes with a slight depth. Hellion Vivian was eating sweetly when she saw the third prince, who was reading a book, looking at her. Is it very delicious? It was that kind of clear and noble voice that was commanding to the bone. Hellion Vivian thought that the third prince's question was definitely a foreshadowing. What he was going to say next was that a pig like her would find anything delicious to eat. She wouldn't be fooled by him. Therefore, Hellion Vivian was very smart and didn't answer. But what she didn't expect was that the third prince's next action was to hold the scroll in one hand, while the other hand reached out to hold her wrist. Then, he took the remaining half of the osmanthus cake in her hand and sent it into his indifferent thin lips. Hellion Vivian saw this scene and slightly stiffened her body. Why did she feel that the third prince's action was somewhat intimate? Moreover, for him to eat something that she had already eaten, it felt strange. But the third prince still had the appearance of an aloof male god that didn't eat the food of mortals. This made Hellion Vivian unable to pull her hand back for a while. In the past, when she was doing missions in the wild, it wasn't like there wasn't anyone who would take a bite of the compressed biscuits. Perhaps she was just thinking too much. Hellion Vivian was preparing herself mentally when the carriage will seem to have hit something heavy, suddenly swaying. She was holding a teacup in one hand, while the other hand was held by the man. For a moment, she couldn't stabilize her body, but she couldn't reach out to the left side to stabilize her center of gravity because the royal family was sitting there. She subconsciously wanted to avoid the man, but she didn't expect that he would be one step faster than her and press her entire body into his embrace. A light and elegant man's fragrance immediately filled her mouth and nose, like a lotus flower or snow. It was the same as the smell that occasionally came out of the carriage, quiet and cold. "What's the matter?" His voice was very light, without any emotion. The person outside the window respectfully replied, "Reporting to your highness, we don't know who put a stone on the mountain road, but it's not a big matter." Beligaju lowered his eyes and lowered his head to look at her. His beautiful peach blossom eyes slid past her eyes and fell on her messy neck. His deep eyes slightly deepened. His hand was placed on her waist that she couldn't help but hold. The temperature of his palm passed through her clothes, warming her body inch by inch. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his finger actually slightly rubbed against her most sensitive place. Hellion Vivian felt her entire body tremble as a numb feeling spread from her tailbone to her four limbs. Bailey Jiaju was naturally aware of her reaction. His eyes flickered and suddenly revealed a shallow, arrogant, and evil smile. His deep and magnetic voice carried a metallic texture, just like the sound of a good cello, so sensitive. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw the sun faintly shining on that person's body. The light outlined his perfect figure, both good and evil, like a knife or an axe. When he whispered into her ear, the faint sandalwood scent brought along a kind of electric cold. This fellow, he was born to challenge a woman's self-control. Hellion Vivian had already heard that the one who lived in Ghost Palace, as long as he wanted to, he could make any girl melt into him. Unfortunately, she was not in the any girl category. Hellion Vivian turned around and beautifully sat up straight. She said in a light voice, "Your Highness is thinking too much. It's just that my waist is a bit itchy, but this road is too unstable. It's better for your Highness to stay away from me. Who knows what will happen in a while." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.